Chapter 320. When two armies clashed, the battlefield would always be cleaned up. Even if the sentries on both sides were careless, the living beings in the center of the battlefield would have fled for their lives. When people entered the forest, the birds would be frightened and the beasts would run away. Furthermore, when two armies were pressuring, the baleful energy would soar. However, there was a third party in the center of the Red Tail County battlefield. The sentries on both sides intentionally avoided this place. The pale white smoke was like a cloud beast that floated from Tsang Fong City to this place. All the people and beasts that entered this place by mistake were silent. Of course, in reality, it was forced here by Yang Jinda's army. The 210,000 soldiers entered Red Tail County from Hengyang County and headed southeast from the northwest. Even the White Bone Path Sacred Lord had to avoid them. Both sides maintained a subtle distance. In the end, this scene in the center of the battlefield appeared. The pale white smoke rolled, and the White Bone Path Sacred Lord floated in it. Of the two neighboring cities, one was occupied by Yang Jinda, and the other was destroyed by Chongxian and Chu Liang. There was only a 30-mile buffer between the two armies. On a battlefield dominated by extraordinary powers, this was not a safe distance. The war could start at any moment. The baleful energy scattered the clouds in the sky within 100 miles. The pale white smoke in the center of the battlefield looked like a cloud that had landed on the ground, although it looked a little too terrifying. There was a song being sung in the smoke. It was extremely sorrowful and repeated. In the Qi army, Cheng Gung Sheng kept looking at Jiang Wang. This was because after hearing the song, Jiang Wang's expression seemed to have frozen. Only the hand holding the sword had turned white. He had never seen Jiang Wang like this before. Such a resolute killing intent could not be concealed. However, it was not the time for idle chatter in the army. He could only stand silently in the formation and wait for the commander's orders. Chongxian and Chu Liang listened attentively to the lifeless White Bone song. This song was sung by the White Bone Path Elder Liu Yin to protect the White Bone Path Sacred Lord. The fundamental scripture of the White Bone Path was the lifeless White Bone Scripture. Just from the name alone, one could see the significance of this scripture to the White Bone Path. Back in Maplewood City, Liu Yin had used this song to guide the lifeless, indestructible formation. Now, she was using the Yang Kingdom's floating furnace to control the fire for the White Bone Path Holy Lord. If there was even the slightest bit of hope in the Yang Kingdom, Yang Jinda would not have kept a low profile for so many years. I didn't give him a chance to break out of his predicament, so why would he be willing to give me a chance to end this battle? Chongxian Chu Yang seemed to be sighing to himself. This is the variable he's waiting for. When had Yang Jinda ever given up the geographical advantage? Chongxian and Chu Yang advanced step by step, pushing their way forward. Yang Jinda had no geographical advantage at all, and the Chiu Offense Army did not have a foothold either. Little did you know that the marshal was also waiting for this moment. Tian Antai, who came from the Tian family of days, fawned on him. Chongxian and Chu Yang only needed to scold him a little, and he had already become very obedient. In the eyes of many, there was no suspense in this battle. They were just following along to take credit. If they were chased away at this time, they would not even have a place to cry. Chongxian and Chu Liang did not go so far as to not forget the offense of their generals. When it came to military matters, punishment was enough. Our army has the determination to destroy the Zhujiang region, but that doesn't mean that this is the only outcome. This mutated plague is indeed troublesome. Once that evil creature finishes absorbing the plague gas. Chongxian and Chu Liang were speaking casually. At this moment, step on my door of life and death, or my black and white scarf. Kill my old intentions, send me to the afterlife. Kill my old intentions, send me to the afterlife. The lifeless White Bone song suddenly changed slightly. It repeated the last line once, its tone faintly discernible. Chongxian and Chu Liang immediately stopped the conversation and stood up. Get into formation. The generals under Chu Yang's command all led their soldiers. For a moment, the soldiers' malevolent energy was like a tornado. Chung Gung Sheng also received a 5,000-man army because of his contribution in neutralizing the threat of the Rizhao region. Jiang Wang and Shi Si protected him on his left and right. As for Zhongshuan, Chu Liang himself, he directly passed by the vanguard and charged into the pale white smoke. Just as he rushed in, the smoke suddenly dissipated. The rabbit-faced man, the white-bone path elder Lu Yin, and the white-bone path's holy lord were all exposed in front of the two armies. The rabbit-faced man's eyes turned red almost immediately. Without any hesitation, he shot out horizontally into the distance. In the Yang army, the general had just raised his bow when he was stopped by the white-haired general beside him. The enemy is before us. Don't waste any energy. As the rabbit-faced man fled, the white-bone path's holy lord, who had always been expressionless, suddenly turned his head and stared at Lu Yin with indifferent eyes. Lu Yin, who was also flying in the opposite direction, closed her eyes and replied, "Someone is great, as you should understand that I have already absorbed the starlight into my body. Your contamination will not affect me." Why? The white-bone path's holy lord questioned with a voice that was so calm that it was strange. At the same time, he controlled his corporeal body to calm down the crazily surging meatballs. He turned around almost stiffly and stretched out his fist. Visually, it was so slow, but in reality, it was extremely wonderful. It collided with Chong Xian and Chu Liang, who were rushing over with a whistling sound. Boom! With the two people fighting in the air as the center. Huge waves of air blasted out in all directions and landed on Lu Yin, who had fled far away. He could still feel the powerful impact, which made him secretly shocked. Looking at the white-bone path's appearance, it was obvious that he was about to succeed. If he was a step late and allowed him to completely refine his body and become a plague incarnation, he would be able to unleash the power of a god's descent. The consequences would be unimaginable. There's no need to hide, Whitebone. You are no longer Wang Zhangji. Lu Yin was still flying backwards with her eyes closed. You watched me from the netherworld and asked me to worship you as a god. You said that you could let me find my deceased wife as long as I sincerely worshipped her. But how many years has it been? I worked hard for the White-Bone Path and helped a declining sect to be reborn from the ashes. But what about the thing you promised me? The White-Bone Path had already reached the last step of refining the plague incarnation. He still had some reservations about Lu Yin and the others. He told them that there were still 7 breaths of time to complete it, but in reality, it only needed 3 breaths of time. He believed that the lifeless and indestructible formation, which was set up with the aura of plague, death, and calamity, could at least block the attack for 5 breaths of time. But he didn't expect Lu Yin to send out a notice 10 breaths in advance. This notice wasn't aimed at one side alone, but at Chongxian, Chu Liang, and Yang Jinda at the same time. No matter which side attacked, they could stop the last step of the White-Bone Path. Moreover, he had already tampered with a lifeless and indestructible formation, so it didn't work at all. This allowed Chongxian and Chu Liang to get close to him immediately. While dealing with Chongxian and Chu Liang's attacks, the White-Bone Path replied, I said, wait for me to recover my divine power. You have the divine power to refine the plague incarnation, but you don't have the extra divine power to find an ordinary dead soul. Lu Yin didn't hide his emotions, and his face was ferocious. Even if you are a god, you can't tease me like this. As he spoke, his eyes suddenly opened. The pair of nether eyes, which were only white, stared at the White-Bone Path. Bang! A bump on the White-Bone Path's body suddenly exploded, and his body wasn't blocked. He was able to exchange 3 punches with Chongxian and Chu Liang in a row. But every time he received a punch, his body would sway. It wasn't the sway of standing still, but his body was like a container filled with water, and the water in the container was shaking. At the same time, Lu Yin groaned as if he had been severely injured. And the shaking White-Bone Path was still talking to Lu Yin, stay and help me. I'll spare you from your sins. At this moment, his speech had become normal and even had a tone. Without me, you will never see her. In the distance, Liu Yin had closed his eyes again, and blood flowed down from the corners of his eyes. But he turned around without hesitation. I will go there myself. You don't have to worry about it. Chapter 321. Wang Zhangji? Not Wang Zhangji? The white bone, evil god has taken over his body? Seeing Liu Yin escape, Jiang Wang couldn't help but ask Jiang Yin in the Tongtian Palace. Jiang Yin only said, perhaps. Liu Yin escaped. Sacred Lord Whitebone seemed to realize that there was no turning back. He turned around and received Chongxian Chu Liang's punch. After a violent shake, even his voice started to tremble strangely. Submit to me, and I'll grant you immortality. Looks like we can't wait any longer, Chongxian Chu Liang suddenly said calmly. However, he wasn't talking to Sacred Lord Whitebones. He had been waiting for Yang Jianda, but Yang Jianda still hadn't appeared. Then he wouldn't wait. At this moment, he didn't feel any regret because he already knew Yang Jianda's talent. Liu Yin had not only secretly informed him about Sacred Lord Whitebone's plague incarnation and Sacred Lord Whitebone's body, but she had also secretly informed Yang Jianda. Logically speaking, Yang Jianda was the king of Yang country and had more reason to stop this. But he watched everything happen and didn't make a move even when Sacred Lord Whitebone was about to succeed. He used the souls of Yang country's citizens to wait for Chongxian Chu Liang to make a move. Since he had made up his mind, he was waiting for Sacred Lord Whitebone to make a move. Before this evil god incarnation exhausted Chongxian Chu Liang, he definitely wouldn't make a move. Chongxian Chu Liang had expected this, but for some reason, he still felt a faint regret. But this emotion that had nothing to do with the battlefield was cut off in a flash. He widened his eyes and looked properly at Sacred Lord Whitebone for the first time. I've been underestimated by a useless, evil god like you. He shouted, bring me my saber. Military orders were like mountains. His voice carried a lot of weight. From the Chiu offense army's formation, a mighty baleful energy surged into the sky and instantly took shape. A giant saber that was hundreds of feet long appeared in the sky. The saber's arc was extremely high, and the handle was slightly curved. When it appeared in the sky, it seemed to split the sky into two. This was a famous saber that Chongxian Chu Liang kept in the army all year round. It was called life-cutting. The fierceness of the famed saber could only cut off one's life. As soon as the saber appeared, it shot towards Chongxian and Chu Liang. During this process, his body became smaller and smaller, but his baleful aura became heavier and heavier. By the time it finally landed in Chongxian Chu Liang's hands, it had already shrunk to the size of an ordinary object. However, the baleful aura it exuded was so substantial that it enveloped Chongxian Chu Liang's entire being in a faint, profound light. As for Chongxian Chu Liang, he held the saber and slashed down without hesitation. Idiot! Holy Lord Whitebone's hands joined together. His face was expressionless, and the deathly white light flickered. It was as if a monk was clapping his palms together, giving off a pure and holy feeling. This palm closed around the life-severing blade, but in the next moment, the flesh and blood on his palm completely disintegrated, and then his hands abruptly spread apart. The saber chopped down. Sacred Lord Whitebone, who had gradually returned to normal and was about to complete the final stage, was slashed in half by this slash. It was precisely because he sensed that his progress in refining his body was slowly increasing in this level of battle that Chongxian Chu Liang brazenly took out his saber and slashed it apart. However, the left half of Sacred Lord Whitebone's body suddenly reached out and grabbed, pulling back the right half of his body that had been sent flying. After the slash, the two halves of his body merged together again. Even his palm, which was only left with white bones, was covered with flesh and blood again. The Whitebone's sacred body has been completed. This body is immortal and indestructible, he said. At this moment, a voice sounded from the Chiu offense army's formation. This is the Whitebone's secret technique, the flesh-soul return technique. He is not really indestructible. It was Jiang Wang's voice. He, who had been paying attention to the battle situation, immediately reminded him. Although this technique was personally used by Sacred Lord Whitebone and could actually heal his broken body, which was beyond his imagination, he would never forget the flesh-soul return technique. Moreover, Jiang Yin was constantly reminding him in the Tongtian Palace. And on the other side, I didn't believe it either. Chongxian Chu Liang slashed again. This time, Sacred Lord Whitebone directly met it with his fist. However, it was directly cut open from the middle of his fist by the incomparably fierce saber light. Crack, crack! The sound of the saber brushing against the bones was jarring. It continued forward and cut Sacred Lord Whitebone horizontally. The upper half of his body was cut open. He used the same trick again and grabbed the lower half of his body. At such a moment, he turned his eyes and glanced indifferently at the Qiu offense army's formation. The feeling of disgust. He said, the ferocious saber arrived again. This time, he was cut into 4 parts from top to bottom. Chongxian Chuliang looked in the direction of a Yang Kingdom's army. The opponent he valued was always there, and the one in front of him was just an incarnation of an evil god that had yet to be perfected. If it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to wait for him to absorb the plague aura of the Yang Kingdom and leave a clean territory for Qi, he wouldn't have allowed such an evil being to survive until now. Sacred Lord Whitebone's body, which had been cut into 4 parts, was scattered in front of him. Chongxian Chuliang looked forward, but his hands didn't stop. He raised his hand and slashed down. Let's see how you are indestructible. Do. The saber shadows were everywhere, and the sound was loud. In front of the 2 armies, he was like a butcher slaughtering a pig. He directly picked up the longevity saber and chopped Sacred Lord Whitebone into minced meat. Damn it, I'm only 1 step away from the sacred body. A thought flowed like this. This was such a real and clear emotion. It happened in Sacred Lord Whitebone's heart. Then, something terrifying happened. The pile of minced meat on the ground, which couldn't be seen originally, actually started to flow like water, and they gathered together, gradually condensing into the shape of a human. At the same time, a cold wind blew in the surroundings. The wind howled as if ghosts were crying. Even the space was faintly shaking. It was as if some mysterious power was about to descend here. Is this incarnation so important? Chongxian Chuliang frowned for the first time. Then, he reversed the longevity saber and reached out to stroke the blade. Buzz! The longevity saber let out a trembling sound. That was because Chongxian Chuliang had added too much weight to it. Even a powerful, famous saber, like it couldn't bear the burden. Then, the saber fell to the ground. Dong! It was as if the entire earth was groaning in pain. Everyone who heard this sound had a terrifying illusion, as if they had been cut in half. The longevity saber fell to the ground. The cold wind stopped, the ghosts stopped crying, and the power that was shaking space was also dispelled. But under the blade, it was a small meat bun. The meat bun that exploded when Sacred Lord Whitebone resisted Liu Yan's attack. The meat bun was directly destroyed, not even leaving a trace. Most of his flesh and blood had already appeared in the distance, turning into a flash of white light. Substituting the plum for the peach, Chongxian Chuliang raised his saber and wanted to chase. At this moment, in the Yang Kingdom's army, Yang Jianda rose from the ground and jumped into the sky. The white-haired old general in the army took a longbow and shot. The Yang Kingdom's best archer was the Ji family. The power of the entire army was mobilized and gathered in the hands of the white-haired old general, Ji Cheng. Then, he used Yang Jianda as a long arrow and shot it at Chongxian Chuliang. Yang Jianda shot high in the sky and pulled out a dazzling golden spear, stabbing it at Chongxian Chuliang. This attack was like thunder in the clear sky, earth-shattering. Chongxian Chuliang. We haven't met for many years, and the moment we meet, it will be life and death. Why don't you and I decide to fight in front of the battle? Chapter 322. Just as the Whitebone sect Sacred Lord fled with serious injuries and turned into a flash of white light, Chongxian and Chu Liang were stopped by Yang Jianda. Bang! 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 Jiang Wang turned into a flaming meteor and instantly streaked across the sky. He only left behind one sentence. This person has an undying feud with me. It could be considered an explanation. Under such circumstances, Cheng Gung Shen couldn't leave the army without permission. Only Jiang Wang, as an aide, could move freely without joining the military. As for the battle between Yang and Qi, if it didn't involve Cheng Gung-sheng's personal success or failure, he wouldn't be interested at all. Jiang Wang had done enough to kill Shi Jing, manage Qingyang, and assassinate Song Guan. Now that the two armies were facing each other, he couldn't play a big role. His influence was negligible. As for him, he had to do his own thing. Enmity could only be settled by killing. Hatred could only be washed with blood. The scene of Maplewood City's destruction, the journey of tens of thousands of kilometers. He had never forgotten it. Catch up to him. Catch up to him. Jiang Yin obviously couldn't control his emotions in the Tongtian Palace. Or rather, he deliberately didn't control his excitement so that Jiang Wang could see his eagerness and treat his desire seriously. At this time, Sacred Lord Whitebone had failed to refine the Whitebone sacred body and had been chopped into minced meat by Chongxian and Chu Liang. Although he had barely recovered, he was at his weakest moment. In other words, if Jiang Yin wanted to occupy this body, this was the best opportunity. If Jiang Wang didn't do something, he would definitely rebel. He can't run away. When I occupy this Whitebone sacred body, I'll cut off his senses in the netherworld. In the future, if you and I work together, we can go anywhere in the world. The candle in the Tongtian Palace flickered. The flaming meteor was a short-distance escape technique and wasn't suitable for long-distance travel. Fortunately, Sacred Lord Whitebone couldn't escape too far. The entire Yang country was under the restriction of the array. Before breaking the seal, no one could directly escape outside the country. Even Sacred Lord Whitebone could only leave through the bone gate set up earlier. Jiang Yin knew this very well and had told Jiang Wang long ago. As long as I catch up to Sacred Lord Whitebone and fight with him, I'm willing to leave the Tongtian Palace. You don't have to be responsible for success or failure. You are me, and I am you. Our common liberation is here today, in this one move. Jiang Yin kept encouraging Jiang Wang. Jiang Wang knew why Jiang Yin was so anxious. Firstly, it was indeed a rare opportunity. Secondly, after the heaven and earth door was opened, the Tongtian Palace would be open. In other words, Jiang Wang now had a lot of space and time to deal with Jiang Yin and Ming Zhu. Jiang, if he didn't fear Gung Yong, as Gung Jiang Jiang, Jiang Jiang Jiang's Jiang's, Jiang Wang S Jiang's Jiang Jiang. Jiang. No expert would allow another consciousness to live in their body, let alone in such an unsafe way. Unless Jiang Yin could keep up with Jiang Wang's growth and maintain the ability to threaten his divine soul. Therefore, today was the best opportunity. Such a body that even the Whitebone God treasured was a once-in-a-blue-moon body for Jiang Yin. For Holy Lord Whitebone, he chose a completely different direction from Lu Yin. He hid it from his subordinates and opened 3 bone gates as escape routes. Lu Yin was only in a hurry to destroy one of the gates. There were 2 other bone gates that led to different places. Therefore, he wasn't worried about escaping at all. But the loss was too great. After this battle, it could be said that he had suffered a double loss. Not only did the Whitebone sacred body fail, but more than half of the divine power he brought with him when he descended into the Taoist body had been used up. He noticed the movements of Qi and Yang, but from his point of view, the mortal's plan was not worth mentioning. No matter what the other party's goal was, he only needed to completely occupy the Taoist body and refine it into the Whitebone sacred body. He even ignored the 2 parties' plans and just went with the flow. He wanted to go with the flow and refine the Whitebone sacred body directly, then leave calmly between the 2 armies. But Lu Yan's betrayal was an accident. Not only did Lu Yan betray him, but she also seemed to have guessed his thoughts and understood his concealment. She betrayed him 10 breaths in advance. This was the second accident. She succeeded in stopping him at the last moment. The third accident was Chongxian Chuyang. He hadn't appeared in the world for hundreds of years. Previously, he had only fought with Chongxian Chu Liang through the brand. He had indeed underestimated the strength of Chongxian Chu Liang, a military master. He wanted to complete the sacred body while fighting, but he didn't expect Chongxian Chu Liang to explode and beat him to the point that he couldn't fight back. That saber, even he felt that it was fierce. In order to protect this body, he didn't hesitate to mobilize his original body from the netherworld to instill his divine power with a huge consumption. Even so, it was still cut off by Chongxian Chu Liang with a life-cutting knife. Now, although he escaped with the backup plan he had set up during the war, the body that he had gathered with great difficulty was still in danger of collapsing. Moreover, the epidemic gas that he had gathered with great difficulty was destroyed. It was difficult to complete the last step of the sacred body of Whitebone. He had to think about it at length. What's more, Chongxian Chu Liang had already slashed with his knife. He hadn't caught up, but the knife intent still remained in his body and collided with every piece of flesh. That was fine. He's so weak, but he dares to chase after me. He thought faintly in his heart. Jiang Wang's all-out pursuit was certainly not ignored by him, even if he was so weak. He wanted to turn around and crush him to death, but for some reason, he not only felt the emotion of disgust from that little ant, but also a faint sense of threat. This was really ridiculous. However, the emotion of ridiculous didn't have much meaning. But he couldn't take any more risks. This body was very rare, even more so than the arrival hundreds of years ago. Moreover, it wasn't easy to wake up from the bottom of the river of forgetfulness. Although he had a long life, he couldn't bear the same long wait. The thoughts in his heart flowed slowly like the water of time. Sacred Lord Whitebone directly plucked his left hand and threw it to the left. That hand swelled up, and flesh and blood intertwined, condensing into another Sacred Lord Whitebone in midair. Then, he flew away expressionlessly. His person and his hand flew in two different directions. The two directions corresponded to the remaining two bone doors. The flaming meteor fell here, and Jiang Wang's figure appeared. Which way? Jiang Wang asked. He couldn't see through the illusion, so he naturally had to ask Jiang Yin, who knew more about the Whitebone Path. This isn't an illusion. This is the Whitebone Path's secret technique, the flesh and blood puppet. Jiang Yin said in a deep voice in the Tongtian Palace, "We can't catch up. Both sides are real bodies. He can switch to one side at any time." In fact, there was another choice. He could drive the nether candle out and chase after the two sides separately with Jiang Wang. However, if he only relied on the nether candle, he might not be able to catch up with Sacred Lord Whitebone. Secondly, after he left, Jiang Wang might not chase after him. Thirdly, if he couldn't catch up, Jiang Wang might not allow him to return to the Tongtian Palace. His own safety was the most important thing. Therefore, he could only give up this choice. For this reason, he would rather give up this opportunity. Then go left. Jiang Wang didn't hesitate. He turned into a flaming meteor and chased to the left. I don't know what kind of secret technique the flesh and blood puppet is, but it's not easy to take off one of your own arms, right? It's okay to cut off one of his arms, even if it's just his possession. Chapter 3:23. The wind howled. A meteor streaked across the sky. The chase didn't go beyond the red-tail commandery. For Jiang Wang, his determination to kill the Whitebone Path didn't need to be repeated. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he could weaken him a little. For Jiang Yin, weakening Sacred Lord Whitebone was also something he was happy to see, so he continued to help lock onto the traces left by Sacred Lord Whitebone. Sacred Lord Whitebone's weakness could be seen with the naked eye, and it could be seen from his speed. Jiang Wang burst out continuously and finally caught up with him. The Star River was boiling like an oven, and he was ready to kill. However, Sacred Lord Whitebone's body suddenly collapsed and exploded into pieces of flesh in front of him. Sacred Lord Whitebone didn't even resist and directly gave up on this flesh puppet. There must be something wrong when things were abnormal. Jiang Wang wasn't arrogant enough to think that he was qualified to make Sacred Lord Whitebone avoid him without a fight. He couldn't help but be vigilant. Looking at the position where Sacred Lord Whitebone's flesh puppet collapsed, he saw a white bone door. Two bone dragons bit each other's tails, forming an arch, and a door with rotating dim light appeared. Jiang Wang, who had used the white bone escape technique, would never forget the aura flowing inside. The door should lead to Sacred Lord Whitebone's hiding place. But why didn't he try to pass through the door when he was so close to the door? Why did he directly collapse the flesh puppet? This was puzzling and disturbing. In any case, Jiang Wang didn't intend to pass through this Whitebone door. He chased after Sacred Lord Whitebone only because of Jiang Yan's understanding of him and Sacred Lord Whitebone's weak state. He didn't have the confidence to chase in a Sacred Lord Whitebone's lair and kill through the Whitebone path. Jiang Wang pulled out Sauvignon Blanc and was about to break the door. But suddenly he stopped in his tracks, because just above the Whitebone door a beautiful figure descended from the sky. The black dress wrapped around her tightly, but the mountain-like scenery became even more distinct. The black veil covered her face, only revealing a pair of eyes. He only stared fixedly in this direction. An indescribable, perilous wave was in this flowing wave of light. How could Jiang Wang not recognize this pair of eyes? Even that veil was very familiar to him. Do you want to watch me drink? You want to know what I look like? Help me take off my veil. The look in Jiang Wang's eyes was resolute, like a long sword being unsheathed. Its sharpness suddenly rose and cut through the reverie. Miao Yu, the person who appeared in front of the Whitebone gate, was actually the holy maiden of the Whitebone path. Miao Yu. The veil was withdrawn, revealing an extremely charming face. Long time no see. She used a soft and gentle voice to greet him, as if countless emotions that she wanted to say had melted into her voice. However, in the next moment, her eyes suddenly turned cold. She stretched out a jade-like hand, enveloped in white light. I said, "We'll meet again. I'll kill you." As soon as the sound was heard, the person had already fallen. Clang! Clang! His thoughts were pulled horizontally across the sky, intersecting with the beautiful palm that was enveloped in white light. The sound of metal rubbing against each other could be heard. Jiang Wang moved with his sword. In the next moment, he raised his sword to summon the sun, moon, and stars. However, he did not attack Miao Yu. Instead, he used this sword to temporarily escape from the battlefield. Halfway through, he suddenly turned around and used a sword to summon mountains and rivers. The tip of the sword was pressed against Miao Yu's fingertip, which was already thrusting horizontally towards him. A clear and crisp sound was heard. This sword was defense. Jiang Wang held his sword and retreated. Flowers bloomed around him, quickly covering the entire space. Jiang Wang, who took advantage of the momentum to retreat, directly released a sea of flame flowers. "You're worthy of the time I've given you." Miao Yu suddenly laughed softly. Then, she pushed forward with one hand. A white flame flower bloomed in the palm of her hand and pushed forward. Boom! The illusory flower shattered, and the flame flower withered. Miao Yu's white flame flower actually burned through the entire sea of flame flowers. She leaped out from the shattered sea of flowers, her dress fluttering in the wind. Her beauty was unparalleled. Her jade-like fist, enveloped in white light, was about to hit his face. The crown of thorns on Jiang Wang's head flashed and disappeared. At the same time, Miao Yu's body suddenly produced 5 qis, forming 5 chains that bound her body from the inside out. 5 qis binding tiger. But in less than half a breath's time, the chains of 5 qis had already collapsed halfway, dissipating like smoke. 5 qis collapse. Miao Yu's control over her body was far from that of Song Wang, an inner mansion cultivator whose qi and blood had both declined. The fist was already close. Jiang Wang's long sword also shot out. With one sword, the sea of people was boundless. Is your hatred for me only limited to this? The fist rose, the fist advanced, the fist blasted. The fist smashed the sword light that filled the sky, and Miao Yu drove straight in. Chirp, 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 chirp. Countless flame sparrows flew out, with Jiang Wang as the center. At the same time as he laid down the sea of flame flowers, he began to form seals to prepare the erupting flame sparrows. Moreover, this Tao technique had covered him as well. So much so that it looked like Miao Yu's fist was wrapped in white light, and a fist smashed out millions of screaming flame sparrows. Even if Jiang Wang deliberately controlled this technique, he was still inevitably injured by the exploding flame sparrows. Blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. But in front of him, a huge lotus flower bud appeared out of thin air. The flame sparrows pecked and exploded, but the flower bud did not move at all. The petals bloomed one after another, and the lotus flower bloomed. From a huge white lotus, a soft and boneless white jade hand stretched out. The hand, covered in white light, directly caught a flame sparrow and then crushed it. Such a powerful flame sparrow only flashed between the fingers for a moment. It's becoming more and more like it. Miao Yu's eyes were somewhat blurred as she murmured. This voice was dreamlike and illusory, as if a beautiful dreamland was woven in the murmur, quietly arriving. Illusory sound dream. But that layer of beautiful dreamland had just invaded Jiang Wang, and before it could do anything, it quickly rushed to Tongtian Palace and was disintegrated by the netherworld candle. Ah, illusory sound dream. Jiang Yan's voice sounded in Tongtian Palace. Miao Yu was already close, but suddenly her figure retreated, drifting back before Jiang Wang's sword light exploded. Jiang Wang originally disguised himself as having been hit by the illusory sound dream in order to launch a sudden attack. But Miao Yu was also very alert and had already retreated when she felt something was wrong. A strange light flashed in her eyes. I was wondering why the netherworld candle fell into your hands. It has its own thoughts. These words seemed to have a deeper meaning. At the same time, Jiang Yan's voice continued in Tongtian Palace. She has too many flaws, and her control of the White Bone Path's secret arts is not perfect. If it were me, I could take advantage of these flaws and kill her in 10 breaths. Jiang Wang's sword slashed empty air, and he leaped back several times, pulling away from Miao Yu. At the same time, he coldly replied in Tongtian Palace, "Then come out Tongtian Palace and kill her yourself." Jiang Yin returned to silence. Miao Yu naturally had no way of knowing the conversation in Tongtian Palace, but after the failure of illusory sound dream, she seemed to have lost her fighting spirit. She did not pursue the retreating Jiang Wang, and instead leaped back and landed on the White Bone Gate. Jiang Wang took advantage of this opening, and without hesitation, transformed into a flame meteor and flew away. The current hymn was indeed not Miao Yu's match, and was suppressed the entire time. But the gap between them could already be seen. If they met again, Jiang Wang cut off his meaningless thoughts and fled in a few breaths. Miao Yu only quietly watched the flame meteor fly away, not saying a word. Other than calling her Miao Yu, he said nothing to her. After a while, the night veil covered her face again. Miao Yu tapped the ground with the tip of her foot. The two flood dragon skeletons biting each other's tails hissed, and the soul fire in the skeleton's eye sockets suddenly extinguished. Then their bodies collapsed, and white bone fragments fell like rain. The gate in the air with the spinning dim light seemed to have never appeared. P.S. This was the chapter responding to White Bone Gate on the Moon. White Bone Gate on the Moon, meet in life and death. Chapter 3:24. Jiang Wang flew in the air, rushing back to the battlefield. In the Tongtian Palace, Jiang Yan's voice sounded a little bitter, but it was easy to ignore. The Saintess is here, but the White-Bone Saintess ran away without hesitation, which means there's a big problem inside the White-Bone sect. Liu Yin is not the only one who rebelled. It's not just the struggle for power within the sect. He approached the White-Bone sect, but disintegrated his flesh puppet, not to deal with you, but because he was afraid of the White-Bone Saintess. I knew there was a problem inside the White-Bone sect when Rabbit Face attacked Dragon Face. It's a pity that I'm not strong enough to do anything about it. Jiang Wang was still upset that he didn't dare to step into the White-Bone sect directly, even though it was the right choice. Hatred was always unreconciled. Anyway, after this incident, the strength of the white bone venerable god's substitute body will be greatly reduced. Our chance of taking over the white bone saintess's body will be much greater, Jiang Yin said. Jiang Wang didn't point out that the word "we" was inappropriate, but asked if Miao Yu is also involved in the rebellion. Then Lu Yin and Yin Yin are old. And there's also Lu Yin, an old demon with many years of experience. Are you so sure that the white bone's evil god's strength will only be greatly reduced and not directly destroyed? You lack respect for the god of the netherworld, Jiang Wang. Jiang Yin sneered. The ignorant are fearless. So are the people of the white bone sect. The white bone venerable god has lived for so long. Unless you have a deep understanding of him, you can't defeat him. Like you, I only dare to say I have 30% confidence. That's not like the confidence you always show. No, you don't know him at all. So, are you too afraid of this evil god? He's in the netherworld, so what can he do in this world? Jiang Wang interrupted him. No matter how horrible he is, didn't Du Ruhui take advantage of him? No matter how long he has lived, he was still chopped into minced meat by Cheng Xian and Chu Liang. I'm afraid. Jiang Yin fell silent, obviously disdaining to argue with Jiang Wang. Jiang Wang's probing stopped abruptly. After Sacred Lord Whitebone sensed Miao Yu's aura, he immediately disintegrated his flesh and blood puppet and concentrated all his power on the other side. It wasn't because Miao Yu was stronger than Lu Yin that she didn't even want to fight. It was because of the uniqueness of the Saintess of Bones. The two most important members of the White Bone Path were the White Bone Taoist Child and the White Bone Saintess. The White Bone Taoist was personally chosen by the White Bone God, who would lead the awakening. As for the White Bone Saintess, the sect would scour the world to find the most suitable candidate and nurture her from a young age. In the scriptures, the Daozi and the Holy Maiden would become the Holy Lord and Holy Mother, and together they would control the Age of Bones. At this point, many people understood that the so-called Tao Child was only a lie. It was simply a vessel for the Bone God to descend into this world. The White Bone God had never thought of letting anyone replace him to control the Age of Bones. He only wanted to become a god in this world and start the Age of Bones himself. The so-called Sacred Master and Divine Master were actually one entity. Of course, the Saintess wasn't that simple. The roots of the White Bone Path did indeed originate from Taoism. Of course, all the sects and schools in the world could be said to originate from Taoism. After all, Tao summed up the earliest cultivation path of the human race. Until now, Tao in a broad sense was the path of Tao. Tao, in a narrow sense, was Taoism. Back to the White Bone Path, where there was yang, there would be yin, and where there was cause, there would be effect. The so-called Saintess of the White Bone Path was, in essence, the fruit of Tao prepared by the White Bone God for his descent into this world. The cultivation method of the White Bone Saintess was a process of maturation. When the Tao Child completed his awakening, that was when the White Bone God occupied the Tao Child's body and became the Sacred Master, he could directly swallow the fruit of Tao. He could accelerate the process of becoming a god in this world. However, there was an accident this time. First of all, the White Bone True Elixir that he had painstakingly refined was taken away by Emperor Zhuang, so he couldn't reach his peak combat power. Then, Wang Zhangji's tenacity was indeed beyond his expectations. In fact, the awakening of the Tao Child could not be regarded as a simple possession, but more like a kind of inheritance. Because the White Bone God would inherit everything of Wang Zhangji, including identity, karma, fortune, and misfortune, not just occupying the body. It could be said that after the complete awakening, the White Bone God could be regarded as Wang Zhangji. Although this process was completely dominated by the White Bone God, it was equivalent to a turtle dove occupying a magpie's nest. As the Tao Child, Wang Zhangji was chosen by the White Bone God according to the opportunity in the netherworld. It was also because of his gaze and erosion that Wang Zhangji could not open his meridians for a long time and was regarded as a disabled person. What he did not expect was that a mortal could have such a strong spiritual will and firmly occupy the last line of defense. His spirit was completely planted with the body, and to destroy his will would inevitably implicate the body. No matter how he tried, he could not peel it off. His tenacity and tenacity. Even he, who had experienced a long time, was a little surprised. In any case, because of the loss of the white bone pill and Wang Zhangji's tenacity, the white bone god could not be perfected as the sacred master. The Tao child was the cause, and the saintess was the effect. Under normal circumstances, he could, of course, easily swallow the fruit of Tao. However, in this awkward situation where he could not be perfected, karma could also be replaced. To put it simply, even Miao Yu had the opportunity to swallow him in turn. This was also the reason why he directly disintegrated the flesh and blood puppet as soon as he sensed Miao Yu's aura. It was also the reason why he let Miao Yu wander outside when all the higher-ups of the White Bone Path were hiding in the White Bone Underground Palace. It was because Miao Yu, as the White Bone Saintess, had become his biggest threat. Although before this, he was not sure whether Miao Yu knew this secret. His defense was only out of inherent vigilance. Of course, Miao Yu suddenly appeared outside the White Bone door today and blocked his way back. It was obvious that she already knew this secret. She was unwilling to be the fruit of Tao, or her ambition was even more blazing. She directly wanted to turn the fruit of Tao into the cause. These were enough reasons for her to rebel against God. Now, using the power of the plague to refine the White Bone Saintess, disintegrating Wang Zhangji's resistance and completely refining him. This plan had also failed. Moreover, Elder Liu Yan had betrayed him, Saintess Miao Yu had evil intentions, Dragon Face had died in battle, and Bone Messenger Zhang Linchuan, who was left in the underground palace, might not be reliable. The White Bone Path sect in the present world could almost be said to be destroyed. Facing such a situation, Sacred Lord White Bone still did not have any emotional fluctuations, only a faint regret. At this moment, it was already the worst situation. Everything in the present world had to start over again. However, at such a time, he did not lack patience. He was very satisfied with this body. Everything that had happened today only slightly delayed the arrival of the era of White Bones. When the tide of the era surged, any individual's resistance was so insignificant. He opened 3 White Bone doors in the Yang Kingdom. The first one was in front of everyone, leading directly to the White Bone Underground Palace. He ordered Zhang Linchuan to guard the other side, and now it had been destroyed by Liu Yan. The second White Bone door was a backup plan that he had left behind. It was discovered by Miao Yu and also destroyed by her. But in fact, he had also opened the third White Bone door, which was the Cunning Rabbit's third cave. Like the White Bone Underground Palace, it was a hiding place that he had prepared in the present world hundreds of years ago. Back then, it had already been sealed in the dust of history. The person who knew this secret back then had already died. In the present world, no one could know. Chapter 325. Using the flesh and blood puppet to get rid of Jiang Wang's pursuit and Miao Yu's possible counterattack. This business was worth it. Although he had become weaker because of this, the torrent of history would not be stopped by small setbacks. The White Bone Holy Lord quickly found the last White Bone door. The eyes of the entire Yang Kingdom were focused on the battlefield that would decide their fate. No one could stop him. He glanced at the country indifferently and put this place into his huge memory. When the White Bone era came, everything would have its retribution. Then, he stepped into the White Bone door and carefully put away the secret technique. The 2 bone dragons that were biting each other released each other and drilled into the void together. Then, all the White Bone doors in the Yang Kingdom disappeared. Traveling with the help of the power of the Netherworld was as easy as eating and drinking for him. After this day, even an existence like him felt a little tired. He could finally relax a little. But when he thought of the will that belonged to Wang Zhangji that was almost completely destroyed, he could not help but frown. That mortal was simply too stubborn. He stepped out of the door and appeared in a cave in the Zhuang Kingdom. The cave was quiet. Because of the protection of the array, there was still no change after hundreds of years. An existence like him naturally did not need a light source to see the environment clearly. However, with a pa sound, the lights on both sides of the cave wall lit up. It illuminated the cave with the typical white bone path style, and also illuminated the complicated and mysterious array patterns under his feet. Of course, it also included the person standing in front of him, wearing a white bone mask and revealing only a pair of eyes. His eyes were full of light. Even in such a dark cave, even if he was wearing a mask and did not show his face, his clothes were still very exquisite and clean. Even the boots on his feet were spotless. He should not be here, but he appeared here. Zhang Linchuan. At this moment, many things could be connected. For example, he decided to refine the incarnation of the plague with the white bone left behind by the rat face. However, because of the failure in Maplewood City, he handed the specific implementation to Zhang Linchuan. It was Zhang Linchuan who chose the Yang Kingdom as the place of chaos. Of course, he knew about Qi, but hundreds of years ago, Qi was not as powerful as he was now. Because of this, he underestimated Qi's military expert and was severely injured. Zhuang and Qi were separated by several tens of thousands of miles. In order to avoid being hunted down by the people of Zhuang, it was reasonable for them to push their destination as far away as possible. However, did someone as cautious as the Bone Messenger really not know about Qi's situation? It was likely that this person had the intention to use the power of Qi's powerhouse to weaken him. Although the world was vast, it was hard to find a country as weak and small as the Yang Kingdom that was able to successfully spread the plague plan while also being on the side of a strong country. Sacred Lord Whitebone didn't act rashly. Instead, he asked, "How did you know about this place?" Because Zhang Linchuan had personally set up the White Bones Paths operation in the Yang Kingdom. To prevent his people from colluding with the local powerhouses, he had left him in the Palace of Bones. This was a habit he had cultivated from a long time ago, and he had been reminding himself ever since his last descent. However, why was he here? How did he know about this place? Zhang Linchuan, who was supposed to be guarding the Palace of Bones, actually bowed to him when he heard him. "You're a little unfamiliar with this world. I can understand. This is the arrogance of a god. But before you ask this question, why don't you ask how long I've been preparing for this day?" Zhang Linchuan spoke politely and gently, but the content of his words made even someone like Sacred Lord Whitebone feel a chill in his heart. "In order to deal with you, I've flipped through all the books of the sect. I've read all the records about the White Bones Path in the history of the Zhuang Kingdom. Oh, not only the Zhuang Kingdom, but also the records of the Clear River Underwater Palace. I asked to take a look when I gave you the Dragon Ball. I pieced together countless clues." Zhang Linchuan looked around and said with some satisfaction, "Finally, I found this place. You spent so much effort and prepared for so long." Sacred Lord Whitebone asked indifferently, "Is it because of those pitiful grudges again?" "Why would I?" Zhang Linchuan smiled. "I joined the White Bones Path willingly and believed in you willingly. I just want to become stronger." He said, "Become stronger. An ant with the heart of an expert is still an ant." Sacred Lord Whitebone's eyes were like lightning as he saw through all the arrangements here. He understood that since Zhang Linchuan had appeared here, he had been prepared. Then this place was completely different from hundreds of years ago. He could no longer rely on him. "What you've learned belongs to the White Bones secret technique. Do you think you can hurt your god?" He took a step forward. Boom! Lightning flashed. Dazzling lightning burst out from the array patterns carved on the ground and crisscrossed. In an instant, with Sacred Lord Whitebone as the center, a lightning prison was constructed. "If I use the White Bones secret technique, I'll be tainted by you. I've known about this for a long time. I've been concentrating for many years and have already solved this problem." Zhang Linchuan said it casually, as if he didn't realize how amazing it was. He stood outside the Thunder Prison with his hands wide open and his long hair fluttering in the wind. "Otherwise, why do you think Rabbit Face dared to follow me, and why the Holy Maiden dared to stop you?" In the Thunder Prison, Sacred Lord Whitebone had a slight emotion in his heart. He felt that it was a little ridiculous. Could it be that with your lousy thunder technique, you actually want to kill a god? The thunderlight bombarded his body. He walked forward in the thunderlight. Even I am so weak. Any member of the Whitebone sect who made an enemy of him had to give up the Whitebone sect's secret technique, because the Whitebone sect's secret technique could not harm the god of the Whitebone sect. It was equivalent to more than half of one's cultivation being crippled. This was also the reason why very few disciples of any sect betrayed the god, because they had lost the ability to resist. Sacred Lord Whitebone walked forward as if nothing had happened. With a tear of his hands, he tore open the thunder prison, and what welcomed him was the jumping, dark, violent lightning on Zhang Linchuan's open hands. This lightning, Sacred Lord Whitebone raised his eyebrows. Even for him, he had never seen such lightning before. This is the Dark Thunder Forbidden technique that I created by combining the Whitebone sect's secret technique and the Thunder technique. Those who have seen it are all dead, Zhang Linchuan said respectfully. Please try it. The dark black lightning flashed and disappeared from his hand. Then, it appeared in front of Sacred Lord Whitebone. It was like a knife, a sword, a spear, and a spear. In his field of vision, the dark black lightning exploded into various shapes and blasted over in an overwhelming manner. Boom! Sacred Lord Whitebone raised one hand in front of him. White finger bones drilled out of his flesh and blood and instantly expanded. The huge white bone hand clenched and held him in it. Boom! 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 The dark thunder exploded. The white bone hand opened, and Sacred Lord Whitebone walked out his palm. But he only heard sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. He had already seen that he was trapped in the thunder prison again. And this time, it was all dark thunder that was used to construct the prison. Dark thunder light splashed in all directions. When the dark thunder light occasionally touched his body, he actually felt some pain. Liu Yin could resist it because he already had the cultivation of the outer building realm. He could absorb starlight into his body and resist it for a short period of time. Zhang Linchuan, on the other hand, had actually relied on his own talent to develop a way to break it. What was even more terrifying was that in order to deal with him, he had specially created a set of Dark Thunder Forbidden technique. It was not a Taoist technique, but a set of systematic forbidden techniques. What kind of talent was this? Although it was born from the Thunder technique and the Whitebone sect's secret technique, it was a combination of the two and was independent of the two. It completely integrated what he had learned. It was also very obvious that it was aimed at gods like him. Such a forbidden technique, was it really something that his bone envoy could create? He, who was used to being high and mighty, once again found that he still looked down on these ants. Sacred Lord Whitebone raised his divine power and punched the Dark Thunder prison. This time, he couldn't break it open. Chapter 326. Sacred Lord Whitebone's punch failed, so he stopped. He only looked at Zhang Linchuan outside the Thunder prison indifferently. After a long time, what kind of scene had he not seen? Although Zhang Linchuan had indeed surprised him, that was all. If it weren't for the fact that the Whitebone sacred body had not been perfected and that he had been seriously injured by Chong Xian and Chu Liang and had abandoned the flesh and blood puppet, making him unprecedentedly weak, even if this Nether Thunder Forbidden spell was indeed ingenious, it might not be able to do anything to him. However, he still had to wait for another round of deep sleep. Sacred Lord Whitebone sighed softly in his heart. Then, the flesh and blood on his body quickly flowed and disappeared. To be precise, all of them surged inwards into the depths of his bones. His flesh and blood flowed back like water. In the blink of an eye, all of his flesh and blood disappeared, leaving only his bones. However, the faint blood flowing in the bones still indicated where the flesh and blood returned to. Such a true body would not appear easily, but it was the state where he could exert his divine power the most. Leaving his flesh and blood was his efforts as a god in the present world. At this time, he revealed his true body of bones, which meant that he had given up the possibility of this era and wanted to kill this traitor with all his strength. Within the Thundercloud prison, the dark black glow of lightning howled without end, and it ceaselessly blasted the skeleton, yet it was unable to shake it in the slightest. The dark black lightning bound him like chains. He walked forward step by step, and the lightning on his body exploded one after another. He took a step out of the thunder prison and approached Zhang Linchuan. The white soul fire in the skeleton's eye sockets looked at Zhang Linchuan's eyes that were shining brightly. "Die with me." He let out a rare roar and opened his bony hands wide. With just one grab, the sky and earth were covered, and there was no way to retreat. The white bones were like a forest, instantly surrounding Zhang Linchuan. However, rumble. It was not the sound of thunder, but the sound of something heavy crushing between heaven and earth. An ordinary-looking memorial archway was pulled out from the void. 3 rooms, 4 pillars, and 7 floors were crushed with a rumble. There were words on the plaque, "Gates of Hell." Zhang Linchuan had painstakingly found this cave and planned to ambush Holy Lord Whitebones here. Of course, he wouldn't only have the Thunder Prison array pattern carved on the ground. The Nether Thunder Forbidden technique wasn't the only thing he relied on. The illusory image of the Gates of Hell was created by the sacrifice of the Whitebone Path's 3rd Elder. It was in the hands of the Great Elder, Ouyang Lai. After Ouyang Lai died in the battle, everyone in the Whitebone Path thought that the illusory image of the Gates of Hell had fallen into the hands of the great general of Zhuang State, Huangfu Duanming. But in fact, Zhang Linchuan had snatched it from the tiger's mouth and kept it hidden, just for this moment. Zhang Linchuan's thumb and little finger were intertwined while the other 3 fingers were held together. His left hand was pointed straight in front of Sacred Lord Whitebones. The edict said, "Yin and Yang must be separated, and life and death must not be intertwined. Yin and Yang are forbidden here." As soon as the edict fell, the forest of bones surrounding Zhang Linchuan disappeared into thin air. Even Sacred Lord Whitebone's white-bone true body seemed to be driven away by something and involuntarily took a step back. The gates of the underworld separated the yin and yang and was the gateway to the underworld. At this moment, it appeared here to seal the space and prevent Sacred Lord Whitebones from communicating with the power of the netherworld. This illusory image of the Gates of Hell was refined by the Whitebone Path's secret technique. It was part of the plan to destroy Maplewood City and refine the Whitebone True Pill. Of course, Sacred Lord Whitebones knew how far it could go. He tried to control this illusory image of the Gates of Hell, and the result was as expected. Zhang Linchuan was fully prepared and had already completely controlled this illusory image of the Gates of Hell, firmly engraving his own imprint. It was not impossible to fight for control, but that required time. Of course, it was not feasible when the battle was about to begin. Damn it, such a faint thought flashed through his mind. Then he saw Zhang Linchuan had finished forming hand seals, and a flood dragon formed by black lightning emerged from his palm and immediately roared. Roar! The roaring black lightning flood dragon bit the bone hand of Sacred Lord Whitebones in front of him. The teeth of the lightning flood dragon and the bones of the Whitebone true body intersected in the most unavoidable manner. Bang! Sacred Lord Whitebones sent the lightning flood dragon flying with a punch and blasted it apart. In the next moment, Zhang Linchuan's fist, which was surrounded by black lightning, approached him and smashed down on his head. Boom! The 2 fists collided. Zhang Linchuan did not move at all, but his long hair rose and fell. Sacred Lord Whitebones, who was already very weak and was blocked by the power of the netherworld, was actually blasted back into the Thunder Prison by this punch. Zhang Linchuan frowned and flicked his sleeves, as if he was disgusted with the smoke and dust that had accidentally stained them. Then, he took a step forward and pressed his hands directly outside the Thunder Prison. His entire body was wrapped in black lightning, and he injected it into the Thunder Prison to the extreme. Sizzle! The power of the Thunder Prison suddenly increased, and the dark lightning increased. It was like dragons and snakes intertwining, not allowing Sacred Lord Whitebones to take half a step away. Since you can force me to this point, Sacred Lord Whitebones might not have noticed that his emotions were fluctuating more and more. However, this anger was so real and so deep. "Ant, you should be proud." He roared at the sky. The lightning was dissipating. The thunder prison was shaking. The cave was shaking. The entire space was shaking. His white-boned true body began to disintegrate from his toes. He used the method of disintegrating his white-boned true body to shake the space, resist the shadow of the gates of hell, and summon the power of the white-boned god in the depths of the netherworld. He wanted to directly sacrifice himself, give up all the efforts to wake up this time, and send this body to the netherworld. With such an excellent body, even if he couldn't rely on it to become a god in the world, it was enough to become an external body in the netherworld. Everything was shaking, including the shadow of the gates of hell in the void and Zhang Linchuan himself. He clearly felt that the thunder prison was about to collapse, and the shadow of the gates of hell could no longer suppress the yin and yang division. Even though he had planned for so long and prepared so much, it was still not enough. He had still underestimated a god. The operation this time could very well be like drawing water with a bamboo basket, and all his efforts would be in vain. He had paid so much but still got nothing. It completely went against his purpose of becoming stronger. He had planned for so long for this day. How could he accept failure? Zhang Linchuan did not hesitate to bite the tip of his tongue and roar at the Tongtian Palace. He was already an expert who had opened 4 inner palaces. Although he could not obtain the divine power, it was equivalent to having 4 more Tongtian palaces. At this moment, the 5 sources of power exploded with all their strength, and he was in a stalemate with Sacred Lord Whitebone, who did not hesitate to disintegrate his white-bone true body. Let's see if he could not hold on first, or if Sacred Lord Whitebone would collapse first. However, at this moment, creak, the shadow of the gates of hell and the void was suddenly pushed open. The white-bone god in the depths of the netherworld finally sensed this place again and transmitted his divine power. "And I," Sacred Lord Whitebone said indifferently and stiffly. However, when he said this, he was shocked. Why was he so stiff? At this moment, the disintegration of the white-boned true body suddenly stopped. The blood in the depths of the bones overflowed. Flesh and blood rolled back. This process was very clear and not slow. The flesh and blood in the depths of the bones regenerated and covered the skeleton body again. The white-boned true body was sealed back, and Sacred Lord Whitebone returned to his original appearance of complete flesh and blood. Of his 2 eyes, one showed fear in the indifference, while the other lost its indifference and became calm. Wang Zhangji. Chapter 3:27. With the spiritual will of a mortal, he resisted the invasion of the god of the netherworld. Even Sacred Lord Whitebone had to admit Wang Zhangji's tenacity. As soon as he was awakened, he killed all the members of the Wang clan in order to cut off all his ties and disintegrate all his resistance, so that he would be completely hopeless. What he didn't expect was that his resistance, which had been gradually quieting down, suddenly broke out when his brother Wang Zhangxiang died. Then it continued and never stopped. No matter how he attacked, he always maintained the last position of his will. As a result, a god like him couldn't get a more complete power when he came to the world. Using the power of the plague to refine the sacred body of Whitebone and safely erase Wang Zhangji's last will was part of the plan. Everything went smoothly. The power of the plague, which was mixed with the aura of death and resentment, easily crushed Wang Zhangji's resistance. Later, when refining the sacred body of Whitebone, he seemed to have given up. But who would have thought that he had been accumulating all his strength, all for this moment, and all for this gamble? And he didn't notice it at all. In the battle with Zhang Linchuan, his emotions gradually became stronger. Now that he thought about it, it was the performance of Wang Zhangji controlling the body. Until now, Sacred Lord Whitebone suddenly realized that in this battle for the body, he had never won a complete victory. Never. Wang Zhangji's resistance never stopped. In the void, the shadow of the gate of hell stabilized, the shaking of the space stabilized, and the thunder prison stabilized. Only Sacred Lord Whitebone's heart was surging. The heart of a god of the netherworld like him, which had been washed by the river of time, was full of surprises and waves today. He tried his best to fight for the body and let the dark thunder whip his body. The intense pain was felt by him and Wang Zhangji at the same time. However, neither he nor Wang Zhangji was shaken at all. This was a battlefield of wills. Outside the thunder prison, Zhang Linchuan's voice also became excited. Wang Zhangji, I'll help you take revenge. He knew very well that Wang Zhangji had been resisting the attack, but he also thought that his will had been refined when refining the sacred body of Whitebone. At this time, Wang Zhangji suddenly attacked and involved the will of the Whitebone god, which was a complete surprise to him. Under the continuous and unreserved bombardment of the dark thunder, the Whitebone saint body was already on the verge of collapse. His skin and flesh were charred black, and blood flowed out of his 7 orifices. His originally weak body had struggled to resist until now. Inside, Wang Zhangji was expanding his control over his body step by step. Outside, Zhang Linchuan was constantly attacking. Even someone like Sacred Lord Whitebone had finally reached the end of the road. Wang Zhangji's will in his body was still silent. In the past, he had never communicated with it. Not only was there no begging for mercy, no weeping, no fear, there wasn't even a single curse. This person just walked forward in silence and determination. Finally, a god like him realized that this silence was filled with hatred. How profound and how powerful it was. Become gods with me. Share the glory. Why? Resist? He asked in the face of Wang Zhangji's pressing will. He had asked this question countless times, and he actually understood that the other party would not give him an answer. However, this was already the final struggle of a god of the netherworld. His will that occupied this body was gradually disintegrated and slowly withered. In the depths of the void, there was a faint roar, but that voice was so far away that it couldn't be heard clearly. After all, it was too far away and not in the same world. This body, which was only one step away from becoming a sacred body of white bone, finally quieted down. Both eyes were occupied by a kind of calm emotion. At this moment, Zhang Linchuan grabbed with both hands, and the entire dark thunder prison disappeared. The endless dark thunder was taken into his body. The next moment, his soul was pulled out of his body. Riding the power of the dark thunder, he suddenly hit Wang Zhangji and crashed into the body that was extremely close to the sacred body of Whitebone. He actually abandoned his original body and wanted to possess it at this moment. From the beginning, his goal was this body of the Taoist, the sacred body of Whitebone that was refined by the sacred lord of Whitebone. He joined the Whitebone path and believed in evil gods. He watched his parents die tragically in front of him and watched the extinction of his entire clan. Then, he did not hesitate to attack his own city lord, Wei Kyuji. If it were not for the fact that his teacher, Dong A, did not appear at that time, his target would be Dong A. Now, he would not have brazenly rebelled against the Whitebone god. He was not righteous, nor was he evil. He had no love or hatred. He only wanted to become stronger. Therefore, even the Whitebone god admitted that he had the heart of a strong man. At least, it was the heart of a strong man recognized by this god of the netherworld. However, his own body did not have enough potential, or it could be said that he did not have enough luck. Although he had the real spirit of a different vein like the thunder snake, he could not obtain the magical power after breaking through 4 inner houses. Therefore, he aimed at the sacred body of Whitebone. From the earliest time, he knew the secret of the Taoist. He had been preparing for this day. The body that the Whitebone god sought was also his goal. From the beginning, he wanted to compete with the god. At this time, in this body, the long tug of war had just been decided. Although Wang Zhangji turned the tables and showed an extremely tenacious and terrifying willpower, he had absolute confidence. After all, his backup plan to fight for the dominance of the body was prepared for the Whitebone god's willpower. Attacking the sacred lord of Whitebone was just to weaken him. The real battlefield was already set in the sacred body of Whitebone. Before this, Wang Zhangji had almost finished off the white bone god's willpower. That was even better. Zhang Linchuan penetrated the sacred body of white bone with the power of thunder. He was fully prepared to destroy Wang Zhangji's willpower. However, at the same time, Wang Zhangji's divine soul left his body and penetrated directly into Zhang Linchuan's body. This was completely out of Zhang Linchuan's expectation. They exchanged bodies. Wang Zhangji's willpower had been invaded for a long time. Although he had discovered some of the power of the divine soul in the fight with the white bone god's willpower, it was impossible for him to defeat the white bone god in his prime. This was also where Zhang Linchuan's confidence came from. However, he didn't leave too early or too late, which meant that he had been prepared for this moment. Even Wang Zhangji might have noticed his plot against the sacred lord of white bone. The reason why his plot could succeed might be because Wang Zhangji covered it up for him. His thoughts were running fast. Zhang Linchuan quickly adapted to his new body. His own body could be refined into a clone, which was the most suitable. He couldn't give it up. At this time, his advantage was that he understood and was familiar with the secret method of the white bone path. He could adapt to this body refined by the white bone god in the fastest time. However, this was the first time Wang Zhangji came into contact with his body. The most powerful attack of his body was naturally the forbidden thunder technique, which was created by him. If he used the secret method of the white bone path in his body, it was impossible to hurt this sacred body of white bone. Therefore, the overall situation was still not shaken. Thousands of thoughts flashed through Zhang Linchuan's mind. Zhang Linchuan had already adapted to his new body. While suppressing the remnant will of the white bone god, he strode forward and was about to attack his own body to force Wang Zhangji out and kill him. He strode forward. However, black thunder light suddenly appeared, and the electric light pierced. The thunder prison rose again and trapped him on the spot. P.S. The results are really bad. Everyone, come to the Chidian Chinese Network to support the official subscription. Chapter 328. Forbidden Thunder Technique. Zhang Linchuan exclaimed in shock. In such a short period of time? He only watched me use it a few times and familiarize myself with it. He learned the forbidden thunder technique that I created? This kind of comprehension. Zhang Linchuan couldn't help but think, if this person hadn't been possessed by the white bone god, if he could cultivate smoothly, how powerful would he be now? Now is not the time to think about this. He knew the power of his forbidden technique very well. This new white bone sacred body was still very weak, and he was still in the process of breaking in. It was very difficult for him to break through the thunder prison now. However, he only needed a little time. Let him completely destroy the remnant will of the white bone god, completely adapt to this white bone sacred body, and refine it with the thunder prison. He had absolute confidence that he could break through the thunder prison and kill Wang Zhangji. After all, this body was only one step away from perfection, and its potential was almost limitless. However, his own body was relatively ordinary. For many cultivators, the inner mansion realm was already a very terrifying expert, let alone a position like the Four Mansions, which was only one step away from perfection. However, for Zhang Linchuan, he couldn't find any supernatural powers in the Four Mansions. It was completely unable to satisfy his pursuit of power. Zhang Linchuan sat down in the Phantom Thunder Prison and calmly guided the lightning into his body. He was refining his body right in front of Wang Zhangji. He wanted to let him see that this stolen, forbidden technique didn't belong to him after all. No matter how he attacked, it would only help him complete the white bone sacred body. If he had dispersed the thunder prison, it would have been even easier for him. He could just fight directly. However, Wang Zhangji just looked at him calmly. Then he lifted the white bone mask and threw it on the ground, revealing the face that originally belonged to Zhang Linchuan. Her face was still above average, but her pair of unusually calm eyes added a strange charm to her. "Wait for me to come find you," he said. Then he turned and left. He let Zhang Linchuan refine the white bone's sacred body and let the thunder prison rumble behind him. From beginning to end, he only said this one sentence. But for some reason, Zhang Linchuan suddenly felt a chill in his heart. On the battlefield of the Sun Country's Redtail County, Yang Jinda used his body as an arrow to point at Chengshuan's Chuliang. Holding a spear in his hand, he shot down from the sky and openly challenged the two armies to a battle. As the saying goes, after not meeting for many years, the moment we meet, life and death will be decided. Deciding before the battle, it is a play for the three armies. Yang Jinda's battle spear was named Blazing Sunday. Together with Chongxian and Chu Liangji's life-severing saber, they had once illuminated the battlefield. Now that the blazing sun was about to cut off his lifespan again, a life-and-death struggle was about to take place. If Chengshuan's Chu Liang could kill Yang Jinda before the two armies and secure victory, his name would once again spread throughout the world. However, old friends, I can't bear to kill you. Chongxian Chu Liang immediately turned around and retreated into the Qiu offense army's formation without hesitation. He no longer had the valiance he had when he chopped Sacred Lord White Bones into minced meat. Yang Jinda rushed over at lightning speed, but his spear missed. He stood in front of the two armies with an unsightly expression. Is Xiong too old? He asked sharply. Ahan, we are indeed old. Zhongshuan Chuliang replied from afar. Of course we have to give up some land. Let the boys do the work of building up our cause. Yang Jinda's alias in the army was Guhan. It had been many years since he had last heard the name Ahan. Ha ha! Yang Jinda turned his spear around, using the tail of his spear to strike the ground. With the spear as the center, several miles of cracks appeared. He laughed maniacally. Xiong too is afraid of me? His voice shook the two armies, piercing through the clouds. Instantly, there were unconvinced generals in the Qiu offense army who requested to fight. Please take the head of the commander. However, Chengshuan's Chu Liang did not care and ordered, all troops get into formation. The three armies move at the same time. His words were concise. He told the soldiers not to use any tricks and not to waste any effort. The war drums rumbled, and the flag officer waved the war flag. Pung pung pung. Their war boots stepped on ground. The three armies moved at the same time, using their battle formation to suppress. Yang Jinda was filled with hatred, but there was nothing he could do. He had sacrificed so many civilians and allowed White Bone Holy Lord to refine a holy body in the country, to use this variable to affect Chengshuan's Chu Liang. Chengshuan's Chu Liang, who had long viewed Yang country as his, was the first to act. Afterwards, he was going to use this opportunity to fight on the front lines. In his opinion, with Zhongshuan Chuliang's courage and confidence in his youth, with his bravery and world-renowned strength, even if he didn't dare to go to the capital to accept surrender, he wouldn't shrink back in front of two armies. With the request to surrender to the capital, it was also setting up the foundation for this battle. He expected Chengshuan's Chu Liang to not avoid it again and again. The emotion-extinguishing blood demon technique that he used to kill all the officials was also used at this time. With White Bone Holy Lord exhausting his men, he had more confidence in winning the battle. However, he did not expect Chengshuan's Chu Liang to be so calm and not give him any chance. In order to avoid being killed by the army, Yang Jinda could only return to the army. Of course, he did not lack some hype. Xiong Tu is so famous that he does not dare to fight me. The morale of the Yang army rose greatly. The difference was that Qi's Qiu offense army was a famous strong army, and they were not afraid of their commander avoiding the battle. The soldiers only felt aggrieved and angry. Instead, he used all his strength to push this sullenness and anger into his saber and spear. In the middle of Redtail County, in the center of the long flame tail, the two armies collided. The clash of hundreds of thousands of soldiers covered the sky, the earth, and every corner of the field of vision. Killing intent surged into the sky, causing the clouds to churn. For Yang country's 210,000 soldiers, it was difficult to maintain a unified battle formation on such a long battlefront. Only the 10,000 soldiers that guarded Zhaoheng City could maintain their battle formation. This was why the Qiu offense army was the strongest army in the world. On such a huge battlefield, in such an intense battle, they were actually able to maintain their battle formation. The 100,000 Qiu offense army was split into 10 divisions. 9 divisions charged together, and only Chongxian Chu Liang's division was at the back. Cheng Gengsheng's 5,000 soldiers were in one of the divisions. If one looked down from above, they would be able to see that the 9 divisions of the Qiu offense army were split into 18 battle formations. The 18 battle formations were like 18 sharp knives, easily stabbing into Yang country's formation. The strength of the two armies were not on the same level, even though Yang country's army was twice the size of their opponents. However, Yang country's army also displayed a strong fighting spirit. Although their battle formation was broken through, it did not crumble. The white-haired old General Ji Cheng occupied the center of the formation and continuously mobilized his army on a small scale. With a continuous but strong battle formation, he blocked the attacks of the Qiu offense army time and time again. Yang Jianda stood in the middle of the formation like a flag. His personal army was the only one that could go head-to-head with the Qiu offense army, but they were all commanded by the old General Ji Cheng. He only led 10,000 soldiers. The previous incarnation of this army was the volunteer army that fought bravely to serve the country. Although the volunteer army was courageous, it was unavoidable that they were the weakest army. The only special thing was that the 10,000 volunteer army that Yang Jianda led all came from Sangfeng City. Although it was impossible for these 10,000 stragglers to form a military formation under his personal control, they were still able to maintain a basic formation. Just this point alone was enough to show his ability to command troops. Across the long battlefield, amidst the countless battles, he stared in the direction of Chongxian Chu Liang. Although they did not look at each other, he believed that Chongxian Chu Liang, who was in charge of 10,000 elite soldiers, was also looking at him. Chapter 329. Life and death battles were fought with their lives on the line. Blood-colored flowers bloomed all over the mountains and plains. On the ever-changing battlefield, life and death could be decided with a single thought: screams, battle cries, and the rumbling of war drums. The stench of blood and slaughter filled the air. The eyes of both the most heroic and the most cowardly turned red. Zhang Wangji flew back to the battlefield, and this was what he saw. Even though he was already a soaring dragon cultivator and could easily step into the air, he did not dare to enter the battlefield rashly. On a battlefield with hundreds of thousands of people, a few ordinary transcendents would not be of much use. A single clash could extinguish countless lives. There was no safe zone on such a huge battlefield. If one was not careful, they would be swept into the formation. Jiang Wang could only retreat again and again, staying as far away as he could. So, this is Qi 9 soldiers. In Tongtian Palace, Jiang Yin sighed. On the battlefield, the Qiu offense army was practically suppressing their opponents. Yang Jun is really tenacious. Perhaps this is the will to fight for the country. Jiang Wang said, then asked casually, why is the white bone god also paying attention to the situation of the modern world? Jiang Yin replied almost immediately, if he wants to become a modern world god and start the era of white bone, how can he not pay attention to the powerful countries of the modern world? I see. Jiang Wang paused at this point. He retreated again and again, always keeping a certain distance from the battlefield and trying his best not to be swept into the baleful energy. But at this moment his eyes suddenly lit up, because he had already seen Cheng Gengsheng. Even on a fierce battlefield, the fat Cheng Gengsheng was rather conspicuous. The fat man was leading the 5,000 soldiers under his command in a charge, appearing very calm. He constantly smashed through the enemy's defense line and then quickly escaped. The battlefield was not a place suitable for betting on luck. On a battlefield, one could lose one's life at any time, because the most common thing here was death. Jiang Wang had originally approached the battlefield by following the direction of Cheng Gongsheng's army. He did not hesitate and jumped into the Yang army's front line, which was blocking Cheng Gongsheng's army. In midair, a sea of flame flowers spread out. On the battlefield, he pushed the sea of flame flowers to the limit, covering an area of 100 feet. In the middle of the battlefield, there was another small battlefield where flowers bloomed one after another. Under the surging, baleful energy, the sea of flame flowers only lasted for a breath's time, but was enough to confuse the Yang army's soldiers within 100 feet. Who was Cheng Gongsheng? As soon as he saw the flowers blooming flowers, he knew that Cheng Gongsheng's return. Without wasting any more words, he took the lead and rushed to the front. The enemy is in chaos. Follow me to break their formation. 14 was fully armored and stood by his side to protect him without saying a word. Behind him were 5,000 Qiu offense army soldiers, all of them emitting killing intent. This was the first time Jiang Wang had seen Cheng Gongsheng's weapon. As silent as he was, he wielded a pitch-black greatsword. Holding it with both hands, he killed enemies and horses. Everywhere he passed, people and horses would fall, and bodies would be split in half. When Jiang Wang landed, he was in the middle of the enemy's formation. The sea of flame flowers collapsed as soon as it was released, so he naturally couldn't avoid being surrounded and killed. Luckily, just as the sword light exploded, Cheng Gongsheng and Cheng Gongsheng had already led their troops over. With Jiang Wang, Cheng Gongsheng, and Cheng Gongsheng, Cheng Gongsheng, Cheng Gongsheng, and Cheng Gongsheng worked together. I have broken the formation. Cheng Gongsheng directly pulled with his hand, twisting off the enemy general's head as he shouted. The 5,000 soldiers under him all shouted, "Break the formation!" The Yang army soldiers at this front were naturally terrified. If this was a normal battlefield, this fear would spread and easily cause a large-scale collapse. On the battlefield, fear was scarier than the plague, and it spread more easily. However, in a short period of time, another group of soldiers came over and quickly gathered the Yang army soldiers, forming the next line of defense. This reaction was too timely. On such a complicated battlefield, to be able to react so accurately, it was enough to prove the ability of the Yang army's commander. The Qi army was swift and fierce, while the Yang army was like the tide, one wave after another. The Yang kingdom's army had suffered unimaginable sacrifices as they regrouped and scattered to fend off the attacks of the Qiu offense army. The key figures of both sides maintained their silence, allowing themselves to jump out of the chessboard and watch coldly from the sidelines. The huge casualties were like cold numbers that allowed them to assess the situation but did not affect their emotions. Yang Jianda left the battlefield to the veteran General Ji Cheng, while he focused on Chongxian Chuliang. He had always used killing Chongxian Chuliang as the key to breaking the stalemate. It had been this way since the Qi army locked down the border, and he had been determined to achieve this goal. It was because he had worked with and interacted with Chongxian Chuliang before that he knew how terrifying Chongxian Chuliang was. The reverse was also true. Coincidentally, the commander of the Qiu offense army was Chongxian Chuliang, so he was wary of Yang Jianda. Chongxian Chuliang had the courage to go against anyone in the world, but he would not give Yang Jianda a chance to turn the tables. The two sides faced each other from afar, and life and death were like chess. At that time, he could not see it clearly from outside the battlefield, but now that Jiang Wang was in the battle, he could see the tenacity of the Yang army. This was a battle to protect the Yang army, and Yang Jianda was personally leading the battle, so it was not hard to understand their fighting spirit. However, the huge difference in power could not be made up by fighting spirit alone. The reason why the Yang army could maintain such a situation was mainly because of the Qiu offense army's superior commanding skills. They were on the verge of collapse, but they did not fall. Cheng Gongsheng led the battle formation and retreated in front of the Yang army's front line. If there was no definite opportunity, he would not rush to break through the enemy's formation. Instead, he was like a constant chisel, charging, retreating, and charging again to break through the Yang army's defense line. This was the strategy that Chongxian Chu Liang had devised before the battle. However, the Yang army's tenacity was beyond his imagination. It could be said that among the commanders of the Qiu offense army, other than Chongxian Chu Liang, no one could have imagined that the Yang army could do this. Even though Chongxian Chu Liang had repeatedly emphasized that they had to take their opponents seriously, the contempt that had seeped into their bones could not be erased. Back to the battlefield. With Jiang Wang joining the battle formation, Cheng Gengsheng felt much more relaxed. As a result, he could not help but have some thoughts. He scanned his surroundings and then grabbed Jiang Wang in the middle of the formation. He whispered into his ear, "Do you see that old general? He's under that sky green flag." Jiang Wang looked over and saw that in the enemy formation, there was a huge sky green flag on a high platform. On the flag, there was the word Ji, and its claws and teeth were ferocious. Under the flag, there was a white-haired old general. He is Ji Cheng, the former Sky Hero Ji clan. His archery skills. He was once able to compete with the Stone Gately clan. Cheng Gengsheng was filled with ambition. If we can kill him, the Yang army will have nothing to worry about. Chapter 330. The Sky Hero Ji clan was once an aristocratic family that could compete with Li Longchuan's Stone Gately clan. Of course, now that Sky Hero City was no longer heard of, the Sky Hero Ji clan's reputation was naturally gone as well. If victory and defeat could be decided earlier, it would be even better. Jiang Wang looked left and right at the sky blue flag and observed it. Can we kill our way through? Cheng Gengsheng looked at the battlefield again and considered the thickness of the defensive line. After pondering for a while, he said, "Let's give it a try." "Then let's give it a try," Jiang Wang said as he waved his sword. Holy Lord Whitebone had aroused his killing intent. After meeting Miao Yu and exchanging blows, this killing intent was not suppressed. Instead, it became even more fervent. Of course, he had returned to the battlefield to help Zhong Xiansheng. However, now that he had entered the battlefield, he felt a sense of exhilaration. On the battlefield, hesitation was useless. Retreating was useless. After making up his mind, Cheng Gengsheng immediately changed the direction of his army and charged towards the sky blue flag. It had to be said that under the repeated attacks of the Qiu offense army, although the Yang army had relied on the large number of casualties and their tenacious fighting spirit to barely hold on, their line of defense was extremely weak. Cheng Gengsheng gave up on the strategy that Chongxian and Chu Liang had set before the battle. He did not hold back anymore. Instead, he unleashed his full strength and charged forward. In a single charge, he broke through 3 defensive lines. This was the Qiu offense army that did not hold back. On the other hand, the generals on the other side had also noticed the situation here. They waved their flags and quickly mobilized their forces to stop and surround the enemy. The Qiu offense army's strength was displayed at this moment. There was no need for communication. When Cheng Gengsheng suddenly unleashed his power, the other divisions of the Qiu offense army automatically charged forward and restrained the main force of the Yang army. Because of Cheng Gengsheng's charge, the intensity of the battle suddenly increased by several levels. Looking at the battlefield, the 18 divisions of the Qiu offense army were all showing their abilities. Especially the army that Zhong Xuansheng led. They were like a maniac as they directly dug into the deepest part of the Yang army. The entire military formation was pulled into a straight line, killing enemies when they encountered enemies, slaying generals when they encountered generals, and breaking formations when they encountered formations. Charge, charge, charge. He was like an arrow that had left the bow and could not turn back. On the general platform, where Ji Cheng of the Yang army stood, there were many flags. His position was right in the center of the Yang army. As a monarch, Yang Jianda led 10,000 troops to guard the rear. This was the weight of 10,000 caddies, completely pressing down on the old general's shoulders. Yang Jianda had no other choice. Ji Cheng was already very old, his hair and beard trembling, yet he stood on the general platform, his back straight. His son and grandson had all died in battle. The Skybear G clan shouldn't have allowed widows of their clan to remarry, especially if the widows were from the main branch. However, he ordered his daughters-in-law and granddaughters-in-law to remarry, all because they hoped that they could give birth to a son for the Yang kingdom. At this moment, he was looking at the entire army, constantly directing the movements of the soldiers. He was like a diligent old tailor, sewing the holes in his old clothes one after another. With such a lone army breaking into the formation, he naturally wouldn't overlook it. However, after gathering his Tao energy and using his eyesight, he couldn't help but sigh when he saw the youthful faces of the few leaders. The late emperor's last words were to wait for the time when Qi is weak. Seeing these young heroes today, even if I don't die today, it will be difficult for me to do so when my lifespan ends. He sighed and stopped. Pointing his halberd in the direction, he gathered his chi and said loudly, "Is there a good man in the Yang kingdom who is willing to take this flag for me?" A muscular man stepped out. "I request your order." Ji Chung took a deep look at him and said, "Approved." The general jumped down from the general platform, got on his horse, and without saying anything else, he led the 500 men, split up, and directly charged towards Chung Gongsheng's troops. Chung Gongsheng was leading the charge. With him, Jiang Wang and Shi Si as the arrowheads, there was no reason for them to stop, let alone turn back. They only charged forward with all their might. Zhong Xiansheng's every move was filled with heavy techniques, easily using the power of 1,000 caddies. Jiang Wang's sword radiance exploded, bright and sharp. Shi Si's black sword was like a landslide. The 3 arrowheads were unstoppable, piercing through the enemy's formation without any delay. At this moment, the army in front of them suddenly opened up. Then, a cavalry of 500 men came crashing towards them. Boom! This was the most direct collision. It was a collision between 2 ferocious forces, an arrowhead against an arrowhead. Only the strong and brave would win, and only the sharp would move. The 2 armies collided. The muscular general of the Yang army was restrained by the binding tiger of 5 chi as soon as he appeared in front of them. Jiang Wang's sword pierced through the sun and the moon like a flash of lightning. The general fell off his horse. Jiang Wang's movements were faster than Chung Gongsheng and Shi Si's, so he took the lead. Then, the soldiers charged forward and ran over him. From afar, it looked like the 2 arrows were unstoppable. The moment they collided, one of them broke. The arrow that represented Chung Gongsheng's army was still charging forward. The army flag on the platform waved, and the army regrouped, once again separating Chung Gongsheng's army. Ji Chung watched this scene from afar, his white beard trembling slightly. He knew that the muscular man was no match for the Qiu offense army. The muscular man himself knew that as well, but he still gave the order, and his men charged forward without hesitation. Because the Yang army was in a very difficult situation on the entire battlefield. He didn't have an endless number of soldiers to deploy. With his superb commanding skills, he was able to maintain the defensive line by robbing Peter to pay Paul. It was really difficult to deploy forces to surround and annihilate the enemy. The Yang army's experts had already been deployed to the front lines. He couldn't keep them by his side to protect him. He exclaimed that Shi was a heroic young man because he found a loophole in the Yang army so quickly and acted so decisively. And when he ordered his men to fight, it was actually a suicide mission. The unit that used their bodies to stop the Qi army's advance, using their lives to delay the advance of the army, to buy time for him, the tailor, to mend the cloth, sacrificing their lives for their country. Of course, they were the good men of the Yang army. Ji Chung took a deep breath, his voice trembling. This trembling was not because of fear, but because of sadness. Ji Chung was not afraid of death. Even though he was old, he still had the courage to kill the enemy. But now, he was the center of the 3 armies and had to manage the entire situation. He shouldn't and couldn't show off his courage. Once the enemy reached the platform and blocked his command of the army, they would have lost the war. So he was filled with sadness, but he could only ask, "Are there any good men left?" The wind blew, and the flag fluttered. The silence didn't last long. "General, I'm willing to go." It was a female voice. It was a female general. A female general in blood-stained armor, holding a helmet that was obviously too big for her. Ji Cheng looked at her deeply. This was his daughter-in-law, his second son's first wife. She had already remarried under his orders. "Where's Li Langjun?" Ji Cheng asked. His daughter-in-law had remarried to a family with the surname Li. But the female general replied, "He's dead." She raised the helmet in her arms and said, "I only managed to take this back. Go." Ji Cheng almost shouted, "I'm a heroine of Tianxiong." "General." Suddenly, a general rushed forward and said with red eyes, "There are still good men in the Yang army. Let me die first." Their goal was not to die, but to delay the enemy's advance. However, what else could Ji Cheng say when these people's goal was to throw away their lives? This general approves. Chapter 331. Cheng Gengsheng and Jiang Wang led the army forward. Ji Cheng was not the only one who noticed this. The Qiu offense army was also motivated and became more determined. After fighting for a long time, the battle seemed to have sped up, and it was time for the final battle. Was there no one in the 210,000-strong army that could match up to Cheng Gengsheng and Jiang Wang? Of course not. But the Qiu offense army, other than Chongxian Chu Liang's personal troops, had already sent their entire army forward. The Yang army, who was far weaker than their opponents, would not hold back. The Yang army would be even more lacking in experts. In fact, in order to fill up the gaps in the defense line, Ji Cheng did not leave any troops behind to protect the central army. His strategy was to stall for time at all costs, to stall for time. He wanted to drag the battle out until Chongxian Chu Liang had no choice but to enter the battlefield and create an opportunity for Yang Jianda to destroy the army. It was only natural for the 9 soldiers of the Qi kingdom to defeat a mere army of the Yang kingdom. A small victory was normal, and a big victory was a small compliment. If it was a Pyrrhic victory, it could be considered a defeat. A defeat was needless to say. It could even be a draw if they were attacked by political enemies. Zhongshuan Chuliang's reputation as a famous general might be destroyed overnight. Hence, the pressure on Chongxian Chuliang would not be small. However, he was as steady as a mountain and coldly watched the battle between the Qiu offense army and the Yang army. Yang Jianda could sit and watch as the Yang army suffered heavy casualties because he was waiting for an opportunity. He, Chongxian Chu Liang, did not care about being laughed at by the world. He wanted to fight for a Pyrrhic victory. Both sides gave each other the utmost importance. The change occurred in Cheng Gengsheng's troops. This fatty became ruthless and directly charged into the battle alone. This undoubtedly stirred up the battle. A man and a woman each rode a horse. They did not have any troops behind them. The Yang army could not spare any more soldiers. However, they were charging. They were charging against Cheng Gengsheng and Jiang Wang. 2 horses against 1,000 soldiers. There were no shouts or cries. They were silent. He rushed past them. That Tianxiong woman, that good man from the Yang country who begged to die first. They were killed by Jiang Wang and 14 before they could even make a splash. Forward, forward. 5,000 men had fought their way to this place, but they had already suffered severe casualties. There were only about 3,000 men left, and nearly half of them were dead or injured. To the elite Qiu offense army, this battle loss was already extremely terrifying. With such injuries, if he didn't make a great contribution, it would be a great mistake. However, the elites of the Qiu offense army were also on display here. Although nearly half of them were dead or injured, none of them retreated. None of them died with their backs facing the enemy. All of the dead had died in a frontal assault. All of them had died while charging. As for the Yang army, they seemed to have gone mad. More and more people came to intercept them. However, they were becoming more and more disorganized. In the end, an army of more than 2,000 people finally came crashing into them. It was obvious that they had just retreated from the front line. Almost all of them were injured, and their killing intent was overflowing. After charging to this point, even someone as strong as Jiang Wang felt a little tired, not to mention the ordinary soldiers. However, Cheng Gung Sheng wasn't worried when he suddenly faced this enemy army. Instead, he was delighted. The appearance of this army meant that the situation had reached its final juncture. As long as this army was defeated, the situation would be clear: kill the generals and seize the flag. It's all up to us now. He shouted loudly and activated the army formation. The entire army's termination energy condensed. In a split second, a gust of wind blew. Everyone, from the generals to the soldiers, was engulfed by the chilling autumn wind and suddenly soared into the sky. In the gust of wind, the termination energy manifested. Withered trees were destroyed, and fallen leaves fell. The killing intent that seemed to have been created by heaven and earth was breathtaking. It was the endless falling of trees, rustling down. On the battlefield, the formation of termination energy was one of the most powerful techniques. For example, Shi Jing's yin-yang killing formation had transformed into a huge yin-yang fish. One collision had almost killed Manager Qian of the Four Seas Business Alliance. However, in a real battle, such a technique was usually used to determine victory or defeat. This was because it required the cooperation of the entire army. Everyone had to give their all. It was strictly controlled by the army formation, and it consumed a lot of military power. In a long battle, unless one could defeat the opponent in one move, using up military power prematurely would result in one being slaughtered by the opponent in the end. At this moment, it was time for victory or defeat to be decided. Then, victory or defeat would be decided. The enemy army had 2,000 men. They had just retreated from the front line and hurriedly came to fill in the gaps. Their fighting spirit was definitely praiseworthy. However, the absolute difference in strength wasn't something that could be overcome by fighting spirit. Furthermore, in terms of fighting spirit, how could the Qiu offense army lose to others? 2,000 tired soldiers came forward with the intention of risking their lives. As for Cheng Gung Sheng's troops, they directly displayed the pinnacle of their killing formation. Countless broken leaves fell like rain and were swept up by the gust of wind. Like an autumn tornado, it swept past the Yang army in an instant and swallowed them whole. If someone were to observe the entire process from the sky, they would be able to see it. Ever since Cheng Gung Sheng's troops charged towards the Yang army, they didn't stop for even a moment. Like a huge arrow, once it was released, it wouldn't stop until it hit its target. At the start, this arrow only used the front line to charge forward. When it reached the end, it suddenly transformed into the form of the evil energy, causing countless falling trees to fall. In just one move, it broke through the enemy's last line of defense and appeared under the sky blue war flag. On the huge general platform, at this moment, only the old general, Ji Cheng, was left. All the soldiers that could be used had already been sent out. In his vast field of vision, the Qiu offense army was killing in all directions and had already riddled the Yang army with holes. He had already used all his strength and practically burned everything he had to command the troops to maintain the shaky situation. However, this situation could no longer be maintained because the enemy had arrived. They were already in front of the general platform. Which tiger wants to take this old general's head? The white-haired old general shouted in the wind. Me, Cheng Gung Sheng. Me, Jiang Wang. Jiang Wang's blood boiled as he was stimulated by the atmosphere. At this moment, all the lines of defense had been broken through. There was no longer any obstacle between them and Ji Cheng. He and Cheng Gung Sheng stared straight at this old general. The entire army roared and rolled onto the general platform. Boom! An arrow that roared and howled. Like the wind, like thunder, like the earth cracking and the sky collapsing. Ji Cheng's white hair was still flying in the wind. His skinny hand had already drawn the bow. Even when he spoke, his voice was trembling. However, his hand was so steady as a rock. It was just a simple pull and release. The arrow shot out like the wind and thunder. When the bowstring moved, the arrow had already collided with Cheng Gung Sheng and Jiang Wang's army. Boom! Whether it was Cheng Gung Sheng, Jiang Wang, or Shi Si, they all felt it clearly. This was the strongest obstacle that they had encountered in their entire journey. The arrow roared like the wind and thunder, and the army formation formed by the evil energy was completely overturned. It was as if an invisible giant hand had grabbed the head of the gale that carried the endless fallen leaves and pulled it up. The entire army formation rolled off the general platform, men and horses tumbling. The evil energy dispersed, and the army formation was broken. However, amidst this broken army formation, amidst the tumbling Chiu kill army soldiers, a bright light flashed. A dazzling sword light shot out from the bottom, charging back into the general stage. Jiang Wang's sword light was like a rainbow, and he was like a shooting star. Bam! Cheng Gung Sheng slammed his palm into the ground, creating a deep hole as he followed closely behind Shi Si. The custom-made armor on his body was already too heavy. He tore it off and charged onto the general platform in just a single piece of clothing. Next was Shi Si, with his black helmet, black armor, and black sword. He charged forward silently and resolutely. Then, one Chiu kill army soldier after another. Less than 2,000 of them had died, but as long as they were not completely dead, they continued to climb onto the enemy's general platform. Chapter 332. Within the Chiu Offense Army. Chongxian Chuliang, who was on the Qi Army's platform, saw this scene from afar. He could not help but smile as he said to his left and right, Zhenggenji a tiger. The enemy had already reached their own platform. This was a huge humiliation. One could see that on the huge battlefield, countless Yang army soldiers were desperately charging back, trying to kill the despicable Qi army. This was naturally the worst choice. If Ji Cheng was still in command, he would not have let this happen. However, it had happened. The Qi army naturally would not let this go. They chased after them and started a massacre. A portion of the Yang army returned to fight, while the rest continued to charge back. The battle was in chaos as the Yang army fought on their own. There were those who held their ground and consolidated the defensive line, while there were also those whose eyes were bloodshot and who charged back recklessly. Some returned to reinforce the central army, while others started to escape. After losing Ji Cheng's excellent command, the difference between the Yang army and the Qi army was obvious. It wasn't just in terms of strength or military discipline. The gap between them was huge in all aspects. The battle was irreversible and was heading towards collapse. On the Yang army's platform, Ji Cheng's arrow overturned the enemy's formation. He could not help but take 2 deep breaths. The collapse of the entire battlefield was the beginning of the destruction of his position as the commander of the Yang army. He had almost single-handedly turned the situation around. Correspondingly, when the building collapsed, he was the first to be crushed. This level of collision had already damaged his internal organs. After all, the #1 outer-level expert of the Yang country was old. He had fought for too long, and the injuries he had suffered in his early years had returned. Whether it was Cheng Gung Sheng, Jiang Wang, or Shi Si, they were all not weak. Furthermore, they had commanded thousands of soldiers, and this was the Chiu Offense Army. To be able to overturn them with 1 arrow was enough to prove that Ji Cheng was not old. However, those people who had lost their formation and charged forward without hesitation. It was as if they were announcing to him that Qi was the strongest Qi. It was not just 1 or 2 young geniuses. It was not just 1 or 2 peerless military gods. This was the size of the country, the strength of the world. The Yang country had withered. His entire Ji clan had been annihilated. Even his daughter-in-law, who had remarried, had died in front of him just now. He was the only veteran left. The reason why he had been able to survive all these years was because he had endured one bad news after another and suffered one blow after another. It was because he knew that he was the only veteran left. The Yang kingdom needed him. He could not die. The old general's tiger-like eyes widened. He drew his bow again and shot 3 arrows at once. The arrow pierced through the dazzling sword light. Jiang Wang launched a flaming meteor, but his abdomen was still cut open, leaving behind a trail of blood. An arrow was shot toward the mountain-toppling fatty. The powerful repulsive force blocked the space in front of him. Chung Geng-sheng had already done his best, but the arrow still pierced through everything and stabbed into his abdomen. Although it was blocked by the layers of fat and could not completely penetrate, it still pierced into his flesh and blood. Only the tail feathers outside his body were still trembling. The last arrow landed on the black-armored swordsman. 14 held his greatsword in front of him with both hands. However, when the arrow struck the black greatsword, it still struck the greatsword before striking 14's black armor. Bang! 14 was sent flying dozens of feet away, spitting out blood from his mouth. The 3 arrows were shot at the same time, and all 3 were successful. However, one after another, the densely packed Xiao offense army soldiers had already charged forward. In the blink of an eye, the large general platform was filled with soldiers. Ji Chung leaped up and drew his bow. He did not shoot anyone, but shot an arrow at the ground. When the arrow landed on the platform, the tail feathers were nowhere to be seen. At the same time, a huge shockwave exploded from where the arrow landed. The Qiu offense army soldiers who had just charged onto the platform were all pushed off the platform. There were countless people who died on the spot. Chirp, 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 chirp. The platform that had just been cleared by the arrow was once again filled with countless chirping, flaming sparrows. These were Jiang Wang's explosive flaming sparrows. His abdomen was still bleeding, but he had already counterattacked. Bang! Ji Chung pulled the bowstring, emitting a low, rumbling sound that sounded like an earth dragon. This bow was the heirloom of the Ji clan. He had passed it down to his son, and his son had passed it down to his grandson. In the end, it had returned to his hands. This bow was named Mount Hill. The ancient archers could see all things as mountains and hills, and every shot would hit its mark. Hence its name. The sound of Mount Hill's bowstring rang out, and the countless explosive flaming sparrows were instantly drowned out. In addition, one flaming sparrow after another, before they could even approach Ji Chung, they all collapsed. Chung Geng-sheng, who had been pierced by an arrow in his abdomen, didn't make a sound. He grabbed the trembling tail of the arrow, forcibly pulling it out and throwing it to the ground, along with the blood and flesh that had been gouged out. Afterwards, he leapt up, his fist in the air. A powerful, attractive, and repulsive force drove Ji Chung towards Chung Geng-sheng's fist. Ji Chung had just dispersed the explosive flaming sparrows when he was met with this fist. He was like an old man who couldn't bear it any longer. His entire body left the ground, and with this drive, he met Chung Geng-sheng head-on. Raising his skinny, old tree bark-like fist, he met Chung Geng-sheng's young and massive fist head-on. With the support of a heavy technique, Chung Geng-sheng's fist was far more powerful than Thousand Caddies. But as soon as the two fists clashed, Chung Geng-sheng was knocked backwards, and his fist stance was broken. It wasn't that Ji Cheng's fist couldn't send him flying, but that he had intentionally controlled it. He broke his fist stance, but didn't let him leave. Of course, it was to kill him. Chung Geng-sheng's heavy technique was broken, and his fist stance was broken. Ji Chung directly reversed Mount Hill's bow, using the bowstring to cut off Chung Geng-sheng's head. Dang! A sound rang out. 14, who was wearing black armor, had arrived. He had been sent flying by the arrow, and was still spitting out blood. But he didn't hesitate to charge back, and he had arrived just in time. The large black sword hit Ji Cheng's bowstring heavily, and a loud chime rang out. The bowstring of Mount Hill's bow was pressed to the bottom, and it directly touched the body of the bow. Ji Chung grabbed Mount Hill's bow and flicked the bowstring. The large black sword, along with 14 himself, was sent flying by the bowstring. Ji Chung held Mount Hill's bow, using the bowstring as a blade, and cut Chung Geng-sheng's throat again. But in his heart he sighed softly. The sword light, like a meteor chasing after the moon, fell from the sky. Like starlight and moonlight, there was nowhere to hide. Jiang Wang had arrived again. What made Ji Chung sigh wasn't his own fate. It wasn't that he had temporarily lost the opportunity to kill Cheng Gongsheng, but it was these people from the Qi army. They were so young, so powerful, and so fearless of death. They represented the future, and they represented hope. And the Yang country? The old general's white hair was already gray. Mount Hill's bow was pulled back by itself. Ji Cheng used his body as an arrow and shot backwards, directly letting go of Cheng Gongsheng. He looked up at Jiang Wang and once again raised his skinny fist. Jiang Wang was high in the sky, and with a thought, 5 Qi binding tiger. The Qi rope, which used the 5 Qi as the source, broke, and the 5 Qi were instantly smoothed out. And Ji Cheng had already crashed into the sword light. He faced Jiang Wang head-on and punched, but an extremely strong repulsive force was above, and a surging suction force was below. Cheng Gongsheng steadied himself and opened his arms wide. "Come down with me." Ji Cheng's tall figure suddenly dropped half a foot. At the same time, 14 once again charged back fearlessly. The large sword in his hands drew a long arc. His swordsmanship was simple, direct, and accurate, and he faced death every time. He slashed horizontally at Ji Cheng's waist, and Jiang Wang, who was high in the sky, made a prompt decision. His sword was vast and boundless, and it pierced through Ji Cheng's head. Cheng Gongsheng used all his strength to bind him on the spot with a heavy technique. Surrounded from 3 sides, it was an instant kill. But Ji Cheng's eyes were calm like the silver strands of his hair fluttering in the wind, rising with the wind, falling with the wind. The old general's white hair, how many lives had he seen? Chapter 333. Cheng Gongsheng, Jiang Wang, and 14 cooperated well, instantly forming a killing move. Facing this situation, Ji Cheng's eyes were calm. How many heroes were there in the Tao today? However, an old general was once a young man. This kind of high-spirited spirit, this kind of unstoppable bravery, naturally had also happened before. Now, these 3 young men were all experts in the soaring dragon realm, especially this fatty from the Zhenggenjia. His combat strength was definitely not inferior to normal intermansion realm experts. On the other hand, Ji Chengchui was old and had countless old injuries on his body. He had also spent a great deal of effort on the battlefield, commanding the Yang army to stall the Qiu slaughter army with his own strength. After that, he faced the enemy alone, overturning the entire Qiu offense army formation and breaking the attacks of these 3 young heroes. He already felt powerless. However, he was Ji Cheng after all. After all, he was an outer mansion realm expert. The so-called outer mansion realm was the peak of the 3 middle grades. The outer of the outer mansion realm was not only the opposite of the inner mansion realm, but also the outer space. There is a saying in the cultivation world, "Tall buildings rise from the 4 divine spirits." It referred to the outer mansion realm experts. Through the mysterious connection in the endless starry sky, they projected their power to the 4 spirits' star region and formed the Starlight Tower. These 4 towers were called the Azure Dragon Tower in the east, the White Tiger Tower in the west, the Vermilion Bird Tower in the south, and the Black Tortoise Tower in the north. Just like how the inner mansion realm was called the 5-mansion realm, the outer mansion realm was also called the 4-mansion realm. These 4 Starlight Towers had countless uses that could not be described in a few words. Just talking about the 4 spirit star region projected by the outer mansion realm, each sect had their own understanding of the Tao. Using Taoism as an example, although there were 3 sects, they came from the same source. They all took the majesty of the Azure Dragon, the sincerity of the Vermilion Bird, the benevolence of the Black Tortoise, and the solemnity of the White Tiger. They took the 4 words, majesty, sincerity, benevolence, killing. For example, Confucianism took the words faith, virtue, benevolence, killing. Legalism took the words majesty, fierceness, righteousness, punishment. Buddhism took the words majesty, virtue, wrong, destruction. Mahis took the words majesty, purity, wrong, martial. There were many different examples. Of course, this was not a fixed rule, and it might be different for each individual. It was just that, generally speaking, one had to adhere to the moral code of the family they sought, at least on the surface. As for the military school origin stream that Ji Chung cultivated in this realm, it was strength, intensity, defense, and killing. Every word was a crusade. For a person like Ji Chung, at his peak, he was naturally not an ordinary first-floor or second-floor cultivator. He was a genuine fourth-floor cultivator. The Four Saints building was established in the Four Spirits star zone. Unfortunately, it was difficult to attain immortality without entering God's descent. In the end, he could not endure the recurrence of his old injuries and the ravages of time. At the same time, he was worried about national affairs and grieved over family matters. Heart like a candle flame, body like duckweed. Now, out of the 4 Starlight sacred buildings, only the first floor was usable and still had light. This floor was the White Tiger sacred building, the kill of the Tao of weapons. At this moment, Jiang Wang wielded his sword on top, 14 pairs of broadswords in the middle. Chung Gung Sheng's heavy technique was fully unleashed below. The white-haired old General Ji Chung was surrounded in the middle. But in the middle of the day, starlight suddenly flashed in the west. Ji Cheng's white hair floated in the air. His hand, which was already weak, tightened its grip on the mountain bow once more. Bang! The heavy technique could no longer restrict him, and Chung Gung Sheng was injured instead. His entire body was crushed to the ground by the force of the collapse, and he could not stop vomiting blood. 2 soldiers of the Qiu offense army, who were close to him, rushed over and dragged him out of the place. The other Qiu offense army soldiers quickly filled in the gap and attacked Ji Chung one by one. Receiving the starlight of the White Tiger sacred building into his body, Ji Chung held the bow and dispersed Chung Gung Sheng's heavy technique. With a pull of the bowstring, a frosty white starlight arrow shot out like lightning. Clang! It directly collided with 14th's two-handed greatsword, and this black greatsword, which looked extremely heavy and made of extraordinary materials, actually broke into 2. This was not the end. The frosty white starlight arrow did not lose its momentum and even collided with 14th's black armor, breaking this extraordinary black armor. Half of the arrow pierced into 14th's body. Even someone as strong as 14 was sent flying by this arrow and landed heavily on the ground. For a moment, it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. After the starlight of the White Tiger sacred building entered his body, Ji Cheng's aura became different again. Using the bow to injure Chung Gung Sheng, and using the empty bowstring to pull back the arrow, it was unknown whether 14 was dead or alive. Then, using the bow as a saber, a circular arc of saber light sliced open with his body as the center. The Qiu offense army soldiers who had leapt over fell like rain, their limbs scattered all over the ground. Ji Chung took advantage of the situation to pull up his bow, inverted the Qiu Shan bow, and cut Jiang Wang. All of this sounded complicated, but it all happened at almost the same time. Before Jiang Wang's sword could settle, Chung Gung Sheng had fallen to the ground. 14 had been sent flying, and the Qiu offense army had suffered heavy casualties. Then, Ji Chung turned the bow around and slashed, facing Ji Chung, who had come with the might of the outer tower. Life and death were decided in an instant. At this moment, Jiang Wang's mind was incomparably focused. He didn't even have time to think. This was an instinctive response that had been formed after thousands of repetitive cultivation sessions. Flame flowers, a sea of flame flowers. Binding the tiger, 5 qi binding the tiger. The sword turned from the sea of people to the mountains and rivers, from attack to defense. The mountains and rivers could bear it the most. As soon as the sea of flame flowers spread out, it was cut open by the bowstring. The flame flowers withered before they could touch the bowstring. Binding the tiger, 5 qi binding the tiger collapsed one after another. At this moment, Qiu Shan's bowstring saw that it was impossible to dodge. The icy light seemed to have touched his throat. Suddenly, The shadow of a black candle charged out of Jiang Wang's Tongtian palace. Caught off guard, it crashed into the old General Ji Cheng's body. It was Jiang Yan, at this critical moment of life and death. In order to protect his and Jiang Wang's lives, he directly controlled the shadow of the black candle and engaged in the most naked and direct spiritual collision with Ji Cheng. Ji Cheng's pouncing figure paused. The old general's spiritual flame was like a candle in the wind. He had been holding on for the country all these years. Jiang Yin had accurately grasped his greatest weakness. It showed that his vision was much greater than that of Jiang Wang, Cheng Gengsheng, and the others. That was why he was able to use his spiritual strength, which was not much stronger than Jiang Wang's, to forcefully stop Ji Cheng's attack. With this stop, Jiang Wang was able to free up his hands and covered Ji Cheng with an erupting flame sparrow. Then, he jumped on a flaming meteor and rushed to Cheng Gengsheng's side. "How is it?" he asked urgently. Cheng Gengsheng was still being dragged away by the soldiers. However, after vomiting blood and breathing slightly better, he suddenly flipped over and shouted, "The Yang army is about to collapse. Form the formation with me." Jiang Wang was the first to respond to the formation. All the soldiers of the Qiu army near the platform and those who could fight entered the formation. After a rough sweep, there were only 1,000 people. Energy and evil converged. Cheng Gengsheng did not care so much. He directly combined the power of the formation and swept up autumn leaves and wild winds, howling as they crashed toward Ji Cheng. At that moment, Ji Cheng had already woken up from his daze. The starlight of the sacred bone building entered his body, and he was hit by an erupting flame sparrow. Meanwhile, Cheng Gengsheng had already reorganized the formation and transformed the evil energy once again, engulfing him. Outsiders could only see wild winds sweeping this place and autumn leaves fluttering. That was the external manifestation of the power of the evil energy. And in this formation, 3 startled strings sounded. The boundless power of the evil energy surged violently 3 times before it calmed down. In an instant, a beam of resplendent sword light shot out. It was Jiang Wang, along with his sword, flying in front of the sky-blue battle flag that represented Ji Cheng. His long sword slashed horizontally. This sky-blue war flag had been firmly planted on the platform since the beginning of the war. For countless years, it had proudly floated in the sky of the Yang country. On the entire battlefield, regardless of friend or foe, no one could ignore it. This was the sky-blue war spirit. This was the last ray of light of the Ji clan. The flag had fallen. Chapter 334. As the termination energy dispersed, Zhongshuan Sheng grabbed Ji Cheng's head with one hand, which he had torn off from Ji Cheng's neck, and looked around. Of the 5,000 soldiers of the Qiu offense army, only 700 were still alive. Cheng Gengsheng had made another great contribution by killing the general and seizing the flag. However, there were 4,300 Qiu Slaughter Army elite soldiers that he personally led who died along the way. As the saying went, a general's success was built on 10,000 corpses. Before he could lament, Cheng Gengsheng leaped into the air and raised the old general's head, shouting, "Kill the general! Ji Cheng is dead." The surviving soldiers of the Qiu offense army around the platform shouted in unison, "Kill the general!" Jiang Wang flipped the azure battle flag on the stage and grabbed it with one hand. He waved it in the air and said, "I have already seized the flag." The soldiers shouted in unison, "Seize the flag." The morale of the Yang army had hit rock bottom. The Yang army soldiers who were rushing back to save their own general platform had all lost their backbone at this moment. At this moment, a loud and clear shout came from the rear of the army. "Old General Ji's will lives on. Yang army, charge with me. Yang Jianda. I, Yang Jianda, will only die in this battle." The Yang army was already on the verge of collapse, but after this shout, it rose again, "Only die in this battle." When a sky-blue flag fell, Yang Jianda was watching silently. He had been waiting for a long time, but Chongqian and Chu Liang did not give him a chance. He silently watched the Yang army soldiers kill each other. It usually took 4 or 5 soldiers to exchange the life of one Qiu offense army soldier. He watched as the Qiu offense army charged into the center of the Yang army, and also watched as the Qiu offense army soldiers around the platform attacked like moths to a flame. He watched as both sides displayed a strong will to fight. He watched as the old General Ji Cheng attracted the starlight of the White Tiger's sacred tower. He knew Ji Cheng's situation very well. The starlight of the others had long since dimmed, and even the connection had been lost. After so many years, why couldn't someone as strong as Ji Cheng enter the gods' advent realm? Others said that Ji Cheng was old, but didn't he know that it was because the masters of Qi had been secretly hindering and suppressing him more than once? Ji Cheng had served the country his whole life, but the Yang kingdom had not been able to protect such a famous general. From a handsome youth to a white-haired old man, only the Yang country owed Ji Cheng, not Ji Cheng. He watched helplessly as Ji Cheng's entire family became martyrs, his children, his grandchildren, and then himself. Finally, they watched as the azure-colored war flag of the Ji clan of the heavenly hero Ji clan fell to the ground. The blood devil tome of extinguishing emotions and abstinence had almost extinguished his emotions. But for some reason, he felt his heart ache. The pain pierced his heart. Yang Jianda urged his war horse to gallop madly. This treasured colt that had the strength of a demonic beast was not enough to respond to his feelings. He charged forward. He did not call himself a lone Taoist, not as the ruler of a country. Instead, he led the charge as a citizen of Yang. Following him were the 10,000 soldiers of Songfeng City who volunteered to serve their country. Like a flood, they swept across the battlefield, bringing along the Yang army soldiers who were out of their wits to turn the tide of the battle. He was the ruler of the Yang country, and when needed, he would fight to the death. At this moment, on the Qiu offense army's main platform, Chongqian Chu Liang, who had been accumulating his strength for a long time, strode forward. Why didn't I fight with Ji Cheng? Because Yang Jianda is conserving his energy, and so am I. Facing Yang Jianda, I don't dare to be distracted, but he is distracted. Chongqian Chu Liang did not move his horse, and directly left the platform and charged forward. Soldiers, listen to my orders. He pulled out his fierce-looking life-slicing blade and roared. You small country, how dare you offend the heavens? Follow me to kill this traitor. His 10,000 personal troops followed closely behind, and all of them entered the battlefield. From the overall situation, Yang Jianda led his troops and entered the battlefield from the back of the Yang army. Chongqian Chu Liang led his troops and charged out from the middle of the Qi army. This was because the main battlefield was concentrated in the middle of the Yang army, and even the rear of the Yang army. The Qiu offense army's front line had already reached there. In other words, the Yang army had reached the final juncture. This was the final charge. Both sides were very clear about this. Unless Yang Jianda could break through Chongqian Chu Liang's formation in one charge. But how difficult would that be? On the battlefield, sometimes it was a competition of patience. Yang Jianda might not lose to Chongqian Chu Liang in terms of patience, but the situation did not allow him to wait any longer. Before the Qiu offense army's casualties reached the line that Chongqian Chu Liang could not avoid, the Yang army had already collapsed. He could only lead his troops first. But Chongqian Chu Liang arrived first. This was because the quality of the soldiers on both sides were completely different. The Yang army was not as good as the Qi army, and Yang Jianda's troops were the best of the best, while Chongqian Chu Liang's troops were the best of the best. The two armies met behind Ji Cheng's platform, clashed, and killed each other. Both sides found it hard to understand why Yang Jianda led 10,000 soldiers. Perhaps it was because the Yang army was weak and did not have enough elite soldiers, so they had to use Ji Cheng. Yang Jianda, on the other hand, was confident in his ability to use troops, so he did not need to use too many strong soldiers. Before the battle, Chongxian Chuliang thought the same. But Yang Jinda had repeatedly challenged Chongxian Chuliang, so he naturally had his reasons. His reasons were that he had inherited the peerless demonic technique of the ancient demonic ancestor, the emotionless demonic blood technique. Before the battle, Yang Jinda's body was still covered in the golden light of the Yang family's secret technique, the solar golden flame mantra. What was even more frightening was that the moment the battle started, the 10,000 soldiers that followed Yang Jinda in a battle were all ignited with bloody flames. Yang Xuanzi stayed in Songfeng City for a long time. Although he was mischievous, he was very popular. The citizens of this city lived a different life from other cities, and they supported Yang Court more than other cities. These volunteers from Songfeng City had come bravely because of national affairs. Yang Jinda had taken them in as his personal soldiers, which made them feel honored. Although they did not know the purpose of the talismans given before the battle, they kept them close to their bodies. Yang Jinda had personally taught them simple positioning. Although they did not know the purpose of it, they remembered it well. But they did not expect it to be a talisman that would take their lives. The 10,000 soldiers were all covered in blood flames. In an instant, they were turned into blood flames, and not even their bones were left. Then, the blood flames entered Yang Jinda's body and dyed him red. The golden light on his body turned to blood light, and the light of virtue turned to evil light. The entire battlefield fell silent for a moment. Yang Jinda shouted, "My Yang country's good men are sacrificing their lives to help me achieve a divine technique. I, Yang Jinda, will protect my country with my life and let the heroes rest in peace." He might be ashamed. It could be said that it was cruel. But Yang Jinda knew very well that he had no other choice after the Grand Sky military was destroyed. Qi's influence on the Yang country was imperceptible. Yang Jinda had racked his brains and put in all his effort, but it was only barely enough to continue the Yang country. He had already seen through all of this. Qi's rise was the Yang country's misfortune. He was born as the ruler of the Yang country and was full of strategy and talent. It was Yang Jinda's misfortune. There was no space for other trees to grow beside the towering tree. There was neither sunlight nor rain. He had no choice but to cultivate the blood demon technique. It was also his only hope. If he had been born in the eastern region, Yang Jinda would have been a mighty ruler. If he had been born in an ordinary family, he would have also become a powerhouse and cultivated to the end of his life. But he was born in the eastern region of the present day, in the Yang country of the present day. The burden of continuing the 27 generations of the country was on his shoulders. He had no choice. He had told himself more than once that he had no choice. That was why he could be so ruthless as to kill his blood relatives. That was why he could sit by and watch Ji Chung die. That was the person who had taught him how to draw a bow and how to use troops. Now that things had come to this, there was no right or wrong in killing these 10,000 righteous men. If he died here, everything would come to an end. If he killed Chongxian and Chu Liang and turned the tables, there would be no time to talk about anything else. Since ancient times, the winner was king and the loser was a bandit. A general success was built on 10,000 corpses. P.S. The original mobile app is on Qidian. The original computer app is on Qidian. Everyone, please support the original subscription. It's too difficult to continue using love. Chapter 335. It didn't matter if it was confusion or fear. At this moment, to the remaining Yang country soldiers on the battlefield. As long as Yang Jinda was willing to give them a reason, they could only believe him. When a person was drowning, they would grab onto any straw, even if they knew that it could not save their life. On the battlefield, the Yang country army that was about to collapse stopped. Everyone was paying attention to the clash in the center of the battlefield. Seeing Yang Jinda absorb all the blood flames, his body shrouded in bloodlight as he charged forward, straight for Chongxian Chuliang. Chongxian Chuliang's expression became unprecedentedly serious. Drinking poison to quench thirst. He said this, But he did not try to be brave. Instead, he retreated into the formation and gathered the determination energy of the army to face Yang Jinda. Chongxian Chu Yang's formation was formed. The determination energy of the army was like dragons and snakes, biting and tearing at each other. Finally, under the control of Chongxian Chu Yang, they formed a huge fist and smashed towards Yang Jinda. Yang Jinda, who was shrouded in bloodlight, only punched back. Boom! The two fists were so obvious, it looked like the difference in strength. However, as the two fists clashed, both sides stopped for a moment. Then, the determination energy of the army surged, and Yang Jinda's hair danced in the wind. They were actually on par. The ruler is invincible. A Yang country general screamed. 1 man against 10,000. Yang Jinda flew in the air and punched out again, smashing the formation. Chongxian Chu Yang, come out and fight me to the death. Do not implicate the innocent. The only reply he got was a cold order. Form the Chiu-Kill formation. That order was like 10,000 echoes, reverberating throughout the battlefield. Chiu-Kill, Chiu-Kill, Chiu-Kill. On the entire battlefield, apart from Chongxian Chu Yang's 10,000 troops, there were 18 other formations, amongst which Cheng Gengsheng's troops suffered the most, with only 700 of them left. This was because they had directly broken through the main army and entered the middle of the Yang country army, taking on the most dangerous mission. Of course, they had also killed the general and obtained the flag. Apart from that, most of the other divisions had complete lineups. The Chiu offense army did not have an undeserved reputation. There was a huge difference in strength between them and the Yang army. Even if Ji Cheng tried his best, he could only maintain the situation and prevent it from collapsing. It was very difficult for him to deal much damage to the Chiu offense army. At this moment, Chongxian Chu Yang gave the order, and the Chiu offense army that was active on the battlefield immediately gathered their determination energy. 1 spot, 2 spots, 3 spots Tianantai's troops. Cheng Gengsheng's troops. The soldier chi of the 18 army formations rose, resonating with each other. The autumn wind rose from 18 places, sweeping through the battlefield like sweeping away fallen leaves. The determination energy came from the same source, and they were connected. Meanwhile, the baleful energy under Chongxian Chu Yang's command soared into the air and gathered like a round mirror, like the autumn moon in the sky. The autumn wind was clear, and the autumn moon was bright. The fallen leaves gather and scatter, and the jackdaw perches and is startled again. Suddenly, a saber light slashed down from above the autumn moon. Chongchuan Chu Yang had instantly gathered the strength of the entire Chiu offense army and swung the longevity cutter blade. This saber carried the might of 3 armies and gathered ferocious killing intent. As soon as it appeared, it had already descended before Yang Jinda. Extinguish emotion. Yang Jinda opened his hand and placed it in front of his forehead. His eyes instantly became indifferent. Even the slightest of emotions could no longer be seen. He was like the white bone god, or rather, it was because he knew how strong he was that he had high hopes for the white bone god. He hoped to use him to stop Chongxian Chu Yang's blade. However, he didn't expect that this so-called god's own religion was unstable, and he couldn't even use the strength that he should have before he was forced back by Chongxian Chu Yang. After extinguish emotion, Yang Jinda's other hand reached out in a claw shape and grabbed onto that saber light. He hollered, "Jiweiyu!" The blood color burned, and the saber light shattered. He shattered the saber light, killing his blood relatives, personally killing his children. Before the battle, he absorbed killing energy and burned 10,000 people. His demon technique was close to completion. Under such a state, Yang Jinda was like a god and a demon. He pulled out his spear, blazing sun, and held it in his hand. The bright golden spear touched the bloodlight, giving out a dense, sizzling sound. Even under such a state, Yang Jinda's brows couldn't help but furrow. He found it hard to bear with such pain. Just as the blood-colored light and the golden light clashed, the entire dazzling golden scorching sun battle spear began to spread from the tip of the spear, invading the body of the spear. Yang Jinda was refining his weapon. He wanted to turn the blazing sun spear into a weapon suitable for the extinguishing emotion blood demon technique, so that he could use his combat strength to the maximum. What kind of person was Chongxian Chuliang? Naturally, he wouldn't sit still and watch him succeed. The moment Yang Jinda's blazing sun spear shone bright red, Chongxian Chuliang exploded. The Qiu offense army's energy all gathered together. He drove the formation and rose into the air. Under the control of Chongxian Chuliang, the huge formation was like a leaf floating in the air. It was like a breeze blowing towards Yang Jinda. It was such a light blow, but Yang Jinda's expression changed. He held the incomplete spear and flicked it into the air. The majestic formation activated the energy. Under the military tactics, it turned into a withered yellow wind. It blew toward his face. A bit of red dyed the tip of the spear. Yang Jinda used the extinguishing emotion blood demon technique to pierce the wind. But the spear was easily swatted away. The wind blew towards his face. Green turned yellow, and the leaves left the branches. Life left, and desolation came. Countless leaves fell from the sky. This was the killing of withering. Yang Jinda abruptly opened his mouth and spat out blood flames from his throat, which crashed forward one after another. The blood flames collided with the withering wind. They clashed and destroyed each other. But strangely, there was no sound. It was like a still painting, and the sky was the background. Half was yellow, and the other half was red. Only in this silence would there be occasional sounds. At first, one had to pay close attention to hear one or two sounds, but gradually it became deafening. It was the sound of military boots stepping on the ground, the sound of armor clashing, the sound of war drums, the sound of killing, and all the sounds of charging. The withering wind spread out in the air and instantly evolved into the scene of countless soldiers charging forward. Looking carefully, every soldier under the withering yellow armor did not look like a human. Under their helmets were wisps of withering yellow autumn wind. The autumn wind swept away the fallen leaves mercilessly. As the saying went, crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. The withering and decaying would be finished in one battle and swept clean. This change was unstoppable and unstoppable. This was the killing of breaking dry weeds. Facing this killing, Yang Jinda did not dodge or evade. He even raised his spear and charged back. Holding the spear with both hands, he crossed his legs in the air and charged forward. Alone, he charged towards the energy of the army controlled by Chongxian Chuliang. Unstoppable force, I will block it. Unstoppable force, I will take it. Alone, he blocked thousands of soldiers and horses. Alone, he faced all the strong soldiers of the world with his spear. This great battle had been going on for a long time. This was a battle whose ending was perhaps already destined. However, to the people involved, who would be willing to believe it? The core of the blood demon technique that extinguished emotions and desires was the word blood. Since ancient times, blood was thicker than water. Therefore, to extinguish emotions and desires, one had to kill blood relatives. Yang Jinda charged back at the Qiu offense army with his spear. This scene looked tragic and heroic. His footsteps became heavier and heavier as he charged forward. Every step felt like he was stepping on the heart. In the scene of the killing of breaking dry weeds, a stream of blood energy suddenly soared into the sky. At first glance, it looked like the blood smoke of a military cultivator's morale. However, only the Qiu offense army soldiers who were in the scene knew that it was their blood energy that had suddenly been pulled out from their bodies and shot into the sky. P.S. Someone asked, so I'll tell you. Last week, I did something to increase my strength, but I didn't even achieve a small goal. Maybe they know that I won't be able to explode much even if I risk my life. I can only comfort myself like this. Chapter 336. If not for the fact that the army was protected by the military school's military formation and was suppressed by powerful figures like Chongxian and Chu Liang, Yang Jin's charge would have drained all the blood from the 10,000 Show offense army soldiers and killed them. Now, there was only a small opening, but there was already smoke rising from it. This showed the power of the emotionless and sensual blood demon technique. The image that represented the destruction kill also shook like ripples on water. Yang Jinda stabbed his spear into it. This battle lasted from sunrise to noon, and then from noon to now. At this moment, the setting sun was as red as blood. Under the setting sun, Yang Jinda was like another blood-red sun. His light, his heat, his lifetime of struggle and bravery were all shining and burning at this moment. His entire body was burning with blood flames, as if he was wearing a blood-red dragon robe. The scorching sun battle spear in his hand was a world-famous weapon. The front half of the spear tip was scarlet red, while the back half was dazzling gold. The destruction kill was like a painting that floated in the air, and there was smoke on it. On the other hand, Yang Jinda was like a reckless brute who disregarded everything and was about to tear apart a famous painting, and he attacked in an unreasonable manner. "Fight to the death with me." The entire battlefield froze. Yang Jinda challenged the formation with his spear alone. He stabbed his spear down. The image that represented the destruction kill was shattered. The evil energy surged for 3 to 4 miles. Before the Yang army could rejoice, the Qi army was horrified. The surging evil energy condensed again. Yang Jinda's emotionless and sensual blood demon technique was indeed unexpected. However, wasn't Chongxian and Chu Liang careful precisely to deal with such unexpected situations? He had given Yang Jinda the greatest respect and had also made the best preparations. The withering has fallen. The destruction has stopped. The killing did not stop. Autumn was the season of killing. In the past, the death penalty was usually executed after autumn, as this was the season when the killing aura was the strongest. There were 3 killings in autumn, and the sun withered. The sun destroyed, the destruction kill. Chongxian and Chu Liang's voice had a sharpness that could cut through heaven and earth. "Today, I punish on behalf of the heavens. Yang lords are immoral and bring disaster to the country and its people. First, they spread the plague and then started a war. He should be executed immediately." Amidst the surging termination energy, a saber shot out. At first, he thought it was the world-famous life cutter blade. But upon closer inspection, it was not the life cutter blade. Instead, it was an extremely unique blade condensed from the life cutter blade, as the core and the autumn offense army's baleful energy as the outer shell. The blade was heavy, and the hilt was carved with a ghost head. There was a round opening on the spine of the blade. The ghost head was square, and its back was thick and its face was wide. Just by looking at its shape, one could tell that it was heavy, suitable for chopping. This blade's name was Ghost Head. It was most suitable for beheading. Throughout history, executioners often used this blade to carry out executions. This saber was clearly far away. It was clear that Yang Jinda had already countered with his spear. However, when the saber rose, the termination energy shattered and reassembled. When the blade fell, Yang Jinda's head was already flying. He had actually been beheaded. Just a moment ago, he was still valiant and invincible, single-handedly challenging the formation with his spear. The blood demon art of extinguishing emotions and severing lust was unparalleled. However, in the next moment, his head and body were separated into 2. It was such an abrupt and natural strike. It was as if the crime had been determined. The person had gone to the execution ground, the arrow had fallen to the ground, and the executioner had brandished his saber. Everything was irreversible. When the blade fell, the head flew. Someone as strong as Yang Jinda was already a top god descendant. His body was indestructible and could be said to be immortal. Before he died, his cultivation would not drop. This realm was known as immortal and indestructible. I am like a god descending. In ancient times, it was also known as the immortal realm. Ordinary methods would not be able to kill him. However, when the saber fell, he died cleanly. In their life battles, Chongxian and Chu Liang both won. The reason seemed to be because Qi was strong and Yang was weak. However, to be able to grasp the advantage and not give the opponent a chance to turn the situation around, wasn't that terrifying? The moment Yang Jinda's head flew up, it was as if time had stopped. 30 years ago and 30 years later connected to the arc where the head flew up. Cheng Xian and Chu Liang, who were in the army, were expressionless. Superiors had no friends. This was what he said to Cheng Gongsheng. Because the higher one reached a certain height, the more one would lose control. Because many decisions were no longer up to one's own preferences. Who knew that Cheng Xian and Yang Jinda were each other's only friends? However, one was in Qi, the other was in Yang. One was the famous family of Qi, who shared the same weal and woe as Qi. The other was the royal family of Yang. There was no possibility of both sides changing sides. 30 years ago in Crescent Valley, they had already understood all of this and foresaw this day. After that, they parted ways. For 30 years, there was not a single letter, only a few words. Actually, in terms of one-on-one combat, Cheng Xian and Chu Liang were not inferior to Yang Jinda, even if he had cultivated the emotionless blood demon technique. However, when facing Yang Jinda, he still had to use all his advantages without hesitation. It was not only because lions and tigers would use all their strength to hunt rabbits, but also because people like Yang Jinda could not be allowed to have any chance. It was also because he wanted Yang Jinda to always feel that he lost not because he was inferior, but because he was born inferior. It was a sin of the heavens and not a battle. Only in this way could he preserve his last bit of pride. 30 years passed in the blink of an eye. Life and death were like smoke. So much past, glory, pride, and friendship were hidden in the river of time. People like Cheng Xian and Chu Liang would not give him too much time to reminisce. After a momentary daze, he flew out of the formation and reached out to grab Yang Jinda's flying head. He grabbed Yang Jinda's hair and raised his head high. Yang Jinda is dead. The voice spread across the battlefield. Yang Jinda is dead. Yang Jinda is dead. Yang Jinda is dead. The Qi army repeated loudly. The Yang army instantly collapsed. There was no longer a line of defense on the battlefield. The Qiu offense army soldiers charged fearlessly, killing like they were cutting grass. The largest number of casualties on the battlefield usually occurred after the outcome was decided. The greatest number of kills was usually generated during the pursuit. Countless Yang soldiers took off their armor and knelt on the ground, begging to surrender. Countless Yang soldiers ran like wolves, fleeing in all directions. After the outcome was decided, letting the soldiers kill for a while was an unspoken rule in many wars. After all, they had just fought a life and death battle, and many of their comrades had died. They were also on the brink of death. Hatred and pressure needed to be released. However, this usually did not last for long. After a large number of Yang soldiers threw away their armor, they buried their heads in the ground, hoping to survive this short period of killing. However, Cheng Xian and Chu Liang raised Yang Jinda's head high up in the air and remained silent for a while. Then he said, "Anyone who participates in this battle and goes against the Qi's heavenly army, regardless of whether they surrender or not, will be killed." He directly gave the order to kill. Some Yang soldiers who knelt on the ground got up in fear. They were immediately beheaded and fell to the ground. Some of the Yang soldiers who had just put down their weapons didn't even have time to react before their throats were slit by a sword. The terrified, scattered Yang soldiers were no match for the Qiu offense army. At this moment, they could not put up any effective resistance. They killed like they were cutting grass, and they fell in groups. A carnival of slaughter was about to begin. "Commander, you can't. Commander, you can't." From the edge of the battlefield, an old scholar flew over and pleaded with Cheng Xian and Chu Liang from afar. "The outcome of this battle has already been decided. Commander, why do you have to kill more and increase your reputation?" Immediately, a general raised his sword and prepared to fight. However, Cheng Xian and Chu Liang only waved his hand. "Let him come over." Chapter 337. The old scholar flew over, but the Qi army's massacre did not stop. He flew past the hellish slaughterhouse. Under the cold gazes of a few Qiu offense army generals, he flew to the front of Chongxian Chuliang. What he saw from the corner of his eyes was a massacre. All he heard were sorrowful cries. He looked sorrowful, but in front of Chongxian Chuliang, who was in the air, he straightened his back and looked rather dignified. "Who are you?" Chongxian Chuliang asked. "I am Yang Country's, former Yang Country's Redtail County Chief, Huang Yixing." The old scholar bowed and replied. After bowing slightly, he said anxiously, "Commander, you are a god in commanding troops. Today, you destroyed a country in battle, and you deserve to be famous in the world. However, the two armies fought and killed each other. Killing and surrendering are unknown. Since ancient times, surrenders were spared from death. Commander, why did you order a massacre? I can't bear to see you suffer such a bad reputation, so I risked my life to persuade you. Since you know me, you should know my name." Chongxian Chuliang was still holding Yang Jianda's head in his hand. When he heard this, he said calmly, "No matter how evil you are, can you be more evil than the word murderer?" Huang Yixing instinctively looked at Yang Jianda. Yang Jianda's head was covered in blood, but his round eyes seemed to be looking straight at him. He instinctively avoided his gaze and said with a trembling voice, "Commander, the heavens are virtuous." Chongxian Chuliang interrupted him. "The heavens also have the power to kill. These soldiers dared to go against the heavenly army. If we don't kill them, how can we uphold the heavens' prestige? Yang court has been weak for 100 years, and 3 generations were revered. In the end, it was the army that invaded the country. General, what's wrong with that?" Huang Yixing could not hide his anger. What's wrong with soldiers protecting their country? On the battlefield, they were just fighting for their own masters. Now that the outcome has been decided, Commander, the butcher's knife should stop. You mean that the Qi is an unrighteous army and invades this place? Chongxian Chuliang's eyes narrowed. "I don't dare to have such intentions." Huang Yixing pleaded. "Yang court is corrupt, and the Yang lord is immoral. Today they deserve to die, but the Yang people were innocent. Qi and Yang have been in alliance for several generations. When have the people of Yang ever deviated? You people," Chongxian Chuliang pointed at him, "you've always been arrogant and willful, always thinking that you're rich and noble." It was as if they regarded Qi's honor as their honor, and regarded Qi's strength as their strength. They were just vines that were leeching on Qi's body. Now that the tree is going to get rid of the vines that are obstructing its growth, do you still feel proud? Huang Yixing was in a daze for a long time before he finally spoke with difficulty. Today, the state has been destroyed. The Yang clan's ancestral temple has no more descendants. This was the will of the heavens. However, his voice gradually rose. Since the Yang court has been destroyed, this place is now the land of Qi, and the people of Yang are the people of Qi. How can they slaughter their own people? Moreover, Jingmu was eyeing them covetously in the north, and Xiexia was in the south, harboring old grudges. There is a strong scenery in the west that looks down on the world. Although Qi is strong, how can he win the hearts of people by killing them? Chongshuan's Chuliang only laughed coldly. Yang Jianda rashly mobilized his army, using the arrogance of a small country to offend the dignity of a large country. Originally, I was prepared to exterminate this region. It was a young friend who begged for mercy that made me do this troublesome thing. What bullshit reason and conflict of interest are you talking to me about? Would I, Chongshuan's Chuliang, listen? Although he didn't say it explicitly, the young friend he was referring to was naturally Jiangwang. As for this plea, it was completely false. In order to defeat Yang Jianda, Chongshuan's Chuliang had the determination to kill all the people and soldiers of the Yang clan. But that was only the worst-case scenario. No matter how infamous he was, he wouldn't go so far as to kill everyone in the Zhujiang region when victory was already decided. Only Cheng Gengxing knew that this was to raise Jiangwang's reputation. In essence, It was to use Zheng Genjia's Qingyang town as a banner to re-establish order after the war. It was an important step in the dividing of the pie segment. Cheng Gengsheng's thinking might be a little simplistic, but he was right about one thing. Zheng Genjia did indeed need someone of the light, or at least someone who looked like the light. Because he was Chongshuan's Chu Liang, there really wasn't anyone suitable to be a banner that could comfort the people's hearts. Of course, there might be other reasons, but they weren't worth mentioning. In my life, I've only knelt before the heavens and the earth, and I've never bowed to anyone. Seeing Chongshuan's Chu Liang's attitude, Huang Yixing suddenly knelt down in midair in front of him. He knocked his knee against the air. I'm willing to kneel for the common people. I beg the marshal to have mercy on the people of the Yang clan. Please don't kill the innocent. The sound of a war blade cutting through a neck and blood spurting out. There were screams, cries of pain, begging for mercy, and strange cries of slaughter. All the sounds of slaughter seemed to indicate something. Chongshuan's Chu Yang stared at Huang Yixing for a long time before saying, "Military orders are like mountains. I have no reason to take them back. However, I'm moved by your courage. You're one of the few loyal people in the Yang clan. For your sake, I'll spare the lives of the people of the Yang clan, as long as they sincerely submit. Are you willing to pass on this order for me?" His meaning was that there was no room for negotiation. Seeing that there was no room for negotiation, Huang Yixing pressed his hands against the air and bent down. He touched his forehead to the back of his hands and said with tears streaming down his face, "I'm willing." Then he turned and shot away, not looking at the battlefield again. Chongshuan's Chu Liang didn't care about him. He only lifted Yang Jianda's head and looked at it at the same level. He suddenly sighed. The Yang clan has lost the hearts of the people. How can you be the only one to blame? His personal guard came forward with a jade box. He put the head back into the jade box, took another look at it, and then closed the lid. Sent it back to Linzi. He sighed. In the entire Yang clan, only Yang Jianda and Ji Cheng had the right to send the heads back to Linzi for praise. At this time, Cheng Gengsheng walked over with difficulty. His face was full of murderous intent. "Commander, are you really going to kill him?" Zhongshuan Chu Yang first glanced at him and then said, "On the battlefield, death and life are common. 14 are not dead." Cheng Gengsheng said and added, "What I hate are the soldiers under my command. There are only 700 left of the 5,000. Chongshuan's Chu Liang didn't comment. He only replied to his previous question, "Since he's a traitor, let's give him some reputation." Then he turned around and returned to the main camp, no longer looking at the battlefield behind him. Since Chongshuan's Chu Liang had given the order, the 210,000 soldiers of the Yang clan had to be killed. Huang Yixing seemed to be loyal and compassionate, but he was the county chief of Redtail County. He didn't enter the battlefield before the war and couldn't save the dead Yang clan. After the war, he rushed out to stop the massacre. Although there might be some righteousness, it was probably more to save the reputation of the people. Although it was said that he risked his life to save the people, in reality, under such circumstances, Chongshuan's Chu Liang killing him was worse than killing 10,000 soldiers. The reason why the Yang court lost the hearts of the people, other than the king's inaction, was that the officials in the Yang court all had their own ideas. Whether it was for fame or profit, they were all selfish. That was why Chongshuan's Chu Liang said that Huang Yixing was a traitor. He didn't hesitate to trample on the Yang clan and removed himself from the blame. It was as if he was the only one who was clean when the whole country was in chaos. However, as the county chief of Redtail County, he was undoubtedly a high-ranking official in the Yang court. How could the Yang court's past decisions not involve him? In the end, this person only cared about his reputation and didn't care about his country. Even so, he still had to fulfill this person's reputation. It was because of this person's existence that it was convenient for Qi to rule this place. The more evil the Yang clan was, the more good the Qi clan's officials were. Jiang Wang was a flag in Qingyang town, which was called a paradise. Huang Yixing was also a flag in the Yang clan, which was called bringing order to the chaos. With these two flags, He didn't have to worry about not being able to win the hearts of the people. Chapter 338. Only Chongxian Chuliang and Chenggung Sheng were on the Qi army's main platform, one sitting and one standing. The rest of the generals were in the midst of killing. Only a group of personal guards stood below the platform, not allowing anyone to get close. One must know that in the army, the number of people killed was the most important. Although Chongxian Chuliang had his own reasons for giving the order to kill, he also wanted to let the soldiers who had fought hard for a long time gain more merits. How is 14th? There were no outsiders at this time, so Chongxian Chuliang asked directly. Previously, when he saw Chenggung Sheng's murderous aura, he knew that 14th was the family's death warrior who had grown up with Chenggung Sheng. Chenggung Sheng trusted him very much, and when he saw that 14th was injured and his life was uncertain, he pointed it out. Fortunately, Chenggung Sheng's reply was appropriate. Otherwise, he would not have such an attitude right now. The mountain carrying armor is broken. He is not dead, but he will have to lie down for a few days. Chenggung Sheng replied. Hearing that the mountain carrying armor was broken, Chongxian Chuliang paused for a moment before asking, "Where are the others under your command?" The rest of the soldiers went to kill. Only Jiang Wang returned to Qingyang town. As he said this, Zhongshuan Sheng was afraid that Zhongshuan Chuliang would have other thoughts, so he added, he doesn't like killing, and he doesn't care about the contribution points he gets from taking a few more heads. Yang Jinda was dead, and the Yang army had been wiped out today. Needless to say, Qi Wei County, the rest of the Yang army, could be dealt with, so there was not much point in staying in the army. Chongxian Chuliang suddenly sighed. The Yang people are resilient. The soldiers who witnessed Yang Jinda's battle will not forget his bravery. I want to break their courage and kill their courage. That's why I'm killing them. For Chongxian Chuliang, this was already a rare explanation. Chenggung Sheng asked boldly, "You seem to have a close relationship with Yang Jinda, not just working together?" Before this battle, he and most of the generals in the Qiu offense army did not think highly of Yang Jinda. But after this battle, no one could deny Yang Jinda's strength. Many years ago, he had a name, Guhan. Chenggung Sheng Chuliang heard a familiar name. He suddenly realized the famous saber-breaking formation painting in your study. Gu's name is Guhan. Yang Jinda is one of the few heroes in the world. Zhongshuan Chuliang said, "I know he won't just wait for death. He must have been plotting something all these years. But I didn't expect him to the ancestral temple. The entire Yang. Liang, Gung Liang Wang Yu was Yang, and Gung Chu of his. Those who were sober had no way to save their country. If one day, Jiang Wang and you have different opinions, I hope that you can make the right choice." He knew that the two people that Chenggung Sheng trusted the most were Shi Shu and Jiang Wang. He did not mention Shi Shu because he knew that Shi Shu would always be on Chenggung Sheng's side. Jiang Wang had shown his principles and persistence many times. Chenggung Sheng was silent for a long time and said, "Uncle, if people can only make the so-called right choice, then you shouldn't support me. You should support Zhong Xianzun." After saying this, he bowed deeply to Chu Liang and strode down the stage. He might not care about some merits, but he had to seize the time to fight for his soldiers. On the stage, Chongxian Chuliang was silent for a moment. Just as Chenggung Sheng said, with Yung Genzuan's talent and strength, no matter how one looked at it, he should support Yung Genzuan. However, why did he, Chongxian Chuliang, choose Chenggung Sheng in the end? Was it because of Chenggung Sheng's talent that he showed more potential that he valued? Or was it because he did not want to mention what his brother told him before he died? Outside the battlefield, Jiang Wang left with his sword. The massacre behind him continued, but he did not turn back once. This battle was an all-around victory for the Qi army. Not only did they obtain a huge military victory, but they also took over the Yang country. In terms of public opinion, The other countries had nothing to say. Why did Qi send troops? To protect the order of the East region and to stop the worsening of the plague. Why did the plague worsen? Because the Yang country was corrupt, the governance was chaotic, and the officials all had their own selfish motives. All these factors caused the plague to go out of control. Of course, the Four Seas Business Alliance also had to bear the responsibility of taking advantage of the situation. Then why did the plague appear in the first place? It was all because of the evil White Bones sex conspiracy. Yang Jianda did not understand the situation and knew that he had sinned against the people, so he rashly sent troops to cause trouble. Chongxian Chuyang had no choice but to destroy it. In the war, swords and spears had no eyes. Yang Jianda died an unnatural death. The demonic arts that Yang Jianda cultivated were undoubtedly the best footnote for his rebellious rule. However, to Jiang Wang, all this did not seem to have any meaning other than helping Cheng Gongsheng improve. Being alone in a foreign land, victory, defeat, honor, and disgrace did not seem to matter. Killing Pig Face, Snake Face, Monkey Face, Dragon Face, and the heavily injured White Bones sect lord, these were the attacks that came from his heart. As he flew in the sky, the entire Redtail County and even the Yang country were in chaos. The battlefield behind him was noisy, yet he still felt lonely. When he flew over a cliff, he casually glanced around and happened to meet the eyes of an ordinary-looking young man on the cliff. Jiang Wang recognized him. He was the World Tower assassin, Su, who was in a hurry to receive guests. He was no longer as boastful as before. His gaze was cold. Judging from his appearance, he had been standing here for a long time, probably observing the battlefield in front of him. It was very easy for the Qi army to discover him here. Jiang Wang thought for a moment, then reminded him, if we wait for the result, the Yang army has already lost. Su looked at him quietly for a while. Finally, he said, I understand. Thank you. Jiang Wang did not take it to heart and left on his own. He didn't fly very quickly. Before long, fluttering sounds could be heard as a cloud crane descended from the sky. The nation-locking array was only dispelled after the war ended. Thus, this cloud crane that had been circling around for a long time was finally able to fly over. Jiang Wang reached out to catch it. The cloud crane opened up into a letter in his hand. The sky was already dark. The sounds of fighting on the battlefield were so far away that they could not be heard. The starlight flowed down quietly, as if calming the heart that had just struggled through the slaughter. He only saw the word Big Brother at the beginning. Jiang Wang could not help but laugh. Under the starlight and moonlight, this smile was so youthful. Volume 2 and Chapter 339. Heaven and Earth are supreme. The great emperor decrees, I rule the world with literature and subdue chaos with military force. The generals and generals are the pillars of the imperial court and are the backbone of the country. They can be both civil and military. If they work hard, their achievements will be diminished and their lives won't be appreciated. This person, surnamed Jiang, is a commoner, yet he wants to serve his country. First, there is Rizhao's contribution, followed by Redtail's contribution in capturing the flag. Accumulating merits. The Baron of Qingyang Town, impressive. In Qingyang Town, Cheng Gongsheng finished reading in one breath. He rolled up the edict in his hand and threw it to Jiang Wang. Don't just stand there, Baron of Qingyang Town. The Battle of Yang Country was settled, and now it was time to split the fruits of victory. Not to mention the others. Just Jiang Wang was given the title of Baron of Qingyang Town. This was a baron with a territory, far from what those empty nobles could compare to. There were different official positions in the world, but the titles were mostly the same. It was just below the prince, duke, marquis, earl, viscount, and baron. Normally, foreign countries didn't sympathize with them. Even if they were both small countries, the city lord who protected the country was just food for the turtle beast. His status was obviously far from the city lord of Yang country. However, the titles were mostly the same, so they met in foreign countries. Most people judged their status based on their titles. This edict was sent to the army along with the angel. The main contribution was obviously Chongxian Chuliang. The ceremony had already ended in the army. The angel returned to report, so the edict was passed down by Cheng Gongsheng. With his background, he was used to such things and didn't respect it. As Jiang Wang held the edict, he felt a different emotion in his heart. He had worked hard in Zhuang country for many years. He first entered the outer court and then the inner court. He didn't finish his studies and didn't have time to make a name for himself before he left. He didn't expect to become a baron in Qi. There was no need to talk about his future. Zhu Biqiong was from a sect near the sea and didn't feel much about the Qi's merit system. People like Zhang Hai, Duge Xiao, and the others in Qingyang town all felt honored. From now on, Your Excellency will be a true noble, Zhang Hai said with a flattering smile. Since the battle where the dragon face attacked Qingyang town, he had been vaguely excluded from the core of Qingyang town. As a rare, transcendent cultivator in Qingyang town, his status was very awkward. However, the entire Yang kingdom had been destroyed in a single battle. There was probably no other place more stable than Qingyang town, and he did not have the confidence to seek refuge elsewhere. He could only barely survive in Qingyang town. In order to make Jiang Wang change his mind, he swept away his muddle-headedness of the past. Not only did he work actively, but he also flattered a little too much. It was human nature to be greedy for life and afraid of death, but you would get what you paid for. He didn't have Qian's strength, nor did he have Duge Zhao's courage. Naturally, he wouldn't receive the same treatment. Jiang Wang wouldn't treat him harshly just because he didn't put in any effort before the battle. He would just do as he should. It was not easy to make the best use of people, but he had to learn how to do it. A hereditary baron was, of course, a noble, especially since the entire Qingyang town now belonged to Jiang Wang both legally and practically. This was the result that Cheng Gongsheng fought for. Let's talk inside. He dismissed the others and led Cheng Gongsheng into a quiet room. Now that the plague in the entire Yang kingdom had been sucked dry by the Holy Lord of White Bones, the damage caused by the plague was tragic, but the survivors had to look forward. Qingyang town was the first place to restore order, and it had taken in many refugees. In fact, most of them were people from nearby cities who had migrated here, but they were just pretending to be refugees. Now, the recorded population of the town had just broken through the 40,000 mark. Jiang Wang could be considered to have settled down in Qingyang town. Although he didn't pay much attention to personal enjoyment, his necessary living quarters had been improved. Now, he was no longer squeezed in with the town hall. Instead, he lived alone in an elegant courtyard and kept some servants. Xiao Xiao was also the housekeeper of the courtyard. She handled all of Jiang Wang's matters personally, and she wouldn't easily let others do it. For Jiang Wang, the quiet room used for cultivation was his usual residence. On the contrary, he rarely used his bedroom. The quiet room style was extremely simple. There were 4 empty walls and a square praying mat. Cheng Gongsheng sat on a spare praying mat. Congratulations. You won the bet again. After sitting down, Jiang Wang said, "It's not time to win yet." Cheng Gongsheng said modestly. Although he said that, he couldn't hide the smile on his face. Qi Ting has always been generous. Apart from the title of a hereditary peer baron, your reward this time is nothing else. Apart from this, you're also rewarded with 10,000 vitality stones, 100 pills, and a secret cultivation technique from the National Treasury. As Cheng Gongsheng spoke, he took out a box and handed it over. I picked this cultivation technique for you. See if it's suitable. 10,000 vitality stones was a huge sum. To Jiang Wang, it meant that Jiang Ainan's A-grade meridian unlocking pill was enough to repay him. Of course, compared to the Dao primordial stones, Jiang Wang cared more about the priceless secret cultivation technique from the National Treasury. The cultivation techniques that the Qi court rewarded were divided into secret cultivation techniques from the National Treasury and secret cultivation techniques from the royal family. The former was broad and extensive, while the latter was rare and refined. However, didn't mean that the secret cultivation technique from the national treasury was inferior to the secret cultivation technique from the royal family. It was just that the way they were stored and received was different. As the name implied, the secret cultivation technique from the national treasury was obtained from the Qi court's conquest of the world, while the secret cultivation technique from the royal family was mostly obtained by the Qi court's royal family. It was equivalent to the difference between a public treasury and a private treasury. Anything that could be stored in the national treasury was definitely not ordinary. Moreover, with Cheng Gengsheng's insight, he wouldn't find any rubbish. There was no need to rush. Jiang Wang took the box and put it aside. He was about to ask Cheng Gengsheng for his next thoughts. However, the fat man started to sigh. You should take the things away and return the storage box. You have to return it later. Didn't you just say that the Qi court is very generous? Generous is generous, but he won't reward you indiscriminately. Qingyang Town has been given to you. The secret cultivation technique from the National Treasury has also been rewarded to you, and 10,000 vitality stones. The value of this storage box is almost the same as 10,000 vitality stones. How can he give it to you for free? Cheng Gengsheng rolled his eyes. However, because of his small eyes, it wasn't obvious. Jiang Wang wasn't embarrassed at all. He moved the vitality stones into his storage box and said indignantly, I went through fire and water. All right. Zhong Xuansheng was immensely proud of himself. Your Qingyang Town man is only the first step. Your older brother, will take every step into consideration. Do you understand? He said mysteriously. Next, I will seek the position of Sunshine Town envoy for you. Jiang Wang frowned. I'm only in the Soaring Dragon realm. I'm afraid that's not enough, right? Town Commissioner was a temporary position in the Yang Kingdom. His main responsibility was to guard and assist. It was basically equivalent to a county governor in peacetime. If he handled things well during his term of office and his strength could keep up, he would most likely get the position of county governor. However, Jiang Wang was only in the Soaring Dragon realm. A county governor in the Qi Kingdom had to be at least in the Inner Mansion realm with the Outer Mansion realm as the standard. Even the county governor in the Yang Kingdom had to be in the Inner Mansion realm as the standard. In terms of cultivation, Jiang Wang was far from it. Even his merit points were not enough. Cheng Gengsheng looked around the room. If he didn't cultivate here day and night, he wouldn't be able to blend in so well with the environment. With your talent and hard work, it won't be long before you have the strength to fight against Song Guang and the other Inner Mansion Realm Masters. Plus, your Inner Mansion Realm is already set in stone. What's the problem with your cultivation? As for your merit points, you removed the threat of Rizhao County and took the flag. You pacified the people before the war and pacified them after the war. Now, the people in the Yang Kingdom are thinking about Huang Yixing and you, Jiang Wang. How is a temporary town commissioner not enough? Cheng Gengsheng was talking about Huang Yixing. He entered the battlefield alone and stopped Chongxian and Chu Yang's plan to massacre the Yang Kingdom. His reputation in the Yang Kingdom had reached an unprecedented height. The people of the Yang Kingdom saw him as their savior. The Yang Kingdom had just returned. To pacify the people, he was now the town commissioner of Hingyang County. If he performed well, he would be the future Hingyang County governor. All the officials in the Yang Kingdom had either died or surrendered. At most, they would be demoted. Only this person had improved since the start of the battle. Hingyang County was the old capital of the Yang Kingdom. Naturally, Chiwei County couldn't be compared to it. This made people sigh. Chapter 340. Huang Yixing was able to become a town governor based on his reputation alone. In the current era of Yang, Jiang Wang seemed to be able to do the same. But even so, Cheng Gengsheng might have to use all of his family's merits to make this happen. One of the reasons Huang Yixing was able to control Hingyang County was because he abandoned the dark side and joined the light side as the county chief of Yang Country, although it was after the war. It had great political significance, but it was hard to do it twice. Why don't you do it yourself? Jiang Wang asked. Chung Gung Shung said self-deprecatingly. I'm too big, too eye-catching. Jiang Wang said, who doesn't know that I'm with you? I think there will be a lot of resistance. Chung Gung Shung shook his head. Although you can represent me, you are not me. Jiang Wang came to a realization. The support of a town governor and the position of town governor had a completely different effect on Chung Gung Shung's competition within the Zhonggenjia. With Yung Ganzuin's strength, how could he not find the support of a few county governors? But for both sides, it was a competition of strength, power, potential, status, and even official positions. If Chung Gung Shung could become a town governor, with his strength and the power of the Zhonggenjia, he would definitely become a county chief after a few years. This would surpass Yung Ganzuin in terms of official position. Until now, there had been no news of Yung Ganzuin holding any position. But no matter what, it was impossible for him to become a county chief as soon as he entered the bureaucracy. Thus, Yung Ganzuin would definitely not allow this to happen. After understanding the internal conflict within the Zhonggenjia, it was easy to understand why Chung Gung Shung supported Jiang Wang to become a county chief. After thinking through this, the Dao Yuan stones had all been transferred back to his own storage box. Jiang Wang picked up the last jade slip in the box and handed the empty box back to Chung Gung Shung. Just thinking about it, he knew that this technique was intermediate grade A grade. It was related to fire, but it was not of the fire element. Instead, it was a Taoist technique that was related to the mind. It was called jealous fire. A mid-grade Tao technique usually involved the inner mansion level. However, if it involved the soul, Jiang Wang still had some confidence after surviving the flying snow tribulation in the red makeup mirror. At this time, Chung Gung Shung asked again, do you know who the county governor of Redtail County is? Seeing him put away the empty storage box, Jiang Wang asked, who is it? Gao Shaoling. Chung Gung Shung snorted. He knew that Jiang Wang might not understand, so he explained, it's from Jinghai Hai. He recalled the poem that Su Xiangqian recited outside the heavenly palace mystic realm. It was said that the poem was written by the great scholar Moya. Lingering on the rich and noble until death, sacrificing himself to the country without a famous general, Jiang Wang couldn't help but sigh. It's easier to do things when there's someone in bed. Ha ha! Chung Gung Shung laughed. That's a great idea. The Jinghai Hai didn't contribute much in the Yang Destruction War, nor did they contribute much in conquering the land. However, in the end, they were given such a large piece of cake. It was clear that noble consort Jing's pillow talk was powerful. Of course, the Jinghai Hai must have gotten Chongxian Chu Liang's permission to get such a large piece of cake. He presided over the war against the Yang kingdom and won a comprehensive victory. Anyone who wanted to enter the Yang realm would have to go through Xiong Tuesday. Xiong Tu only needed to say that Gao Shaoling had given him some advice in private, and he would be rewarded. There was only to talk about the political exchange. It was good that noble consort Jing's pillow talk was powerful. After all, they would be on the same side after this exchange. It was just a joke. Chung Gung Shung said, this war made me realize that strength is the foundation. With Yang Jinda's strength and that evil being's interference, it wasn't easy to win this war. The fatty didn't speak a word about the White-Bone sect and only referred to it as that evil being. This meant that the phrase eternal hatred left a deep impression on him. Jiang Wang didn't want to talk about the past, but he still explained to his friend that was the White-Bone evil god's Taoist body. The Zhuang Kingdom, Qinghe County, and Maplewood City, where I was born and raised, was destroyed by that evil being. It was just a simple sentence, but it was hard to describe the hatred of life and death. Chung Gung Shung patted his shoulder and said, good brother, you and I cultivate hard. One day, we might enter the netherworld and slay that evil being. After all, that was still a long way off. Thus, the fatty changed the topic. In this war, the marshal's best choice is to wait for the White-Bone evil god to complete its refinement and leave calmly. Then, you can lead the army to fight it. The war had just ended, so the title of marshal hadn't been changed yet. On the contrary, this reflects the marshal's overall view. Yes, this might be a purely military mistake, but in the long run, it might not be a mistake. However, at the end of the day, our army is strong and has the right to make mistakes. What he said made sense. Jiang Wang thought about it and said, in less than 3 generations, the customs will change, and this place will become the land of Qi. For the Qi to take over the land of the Yang kingdom and expand 3 counties, the marshal has gained a lot this time. It has already been decided. Cheng Gongxin couldn't help but smile. The title will be Ding Yuan. Just this title alone showed the Qi Emperor's ambition and his reliance on Chongxian Chuyang. However, the fatty was suddenly disappointed and clenched his fist. This title is 30 years late. Jiang Wang had always been puzzled. With Chongxian Chu Liang's achievements, how could he not be made a marquis? However, he heard Cheng Gongsheng say, back then, because of some family matters, uncle was implicated. In the end, he only received the title of Count Shenhuai. The 2 words Shenhuai were not evil, but when placed together with Xiong Tu, the meaning of warning was obvious. No wonder. Destroying the Yang kingdom was a great achievement, but with the strength of the Qi Emperor, although Yang Jinda was difficult to deal with, it was inevitable that the Qi Emperor would look down on him. The reason why Chongxian Chuyang could be made a marquis was probably because his achievements in the early years were not fully rewarded. There was also the possibility that the Qi Emperor wanted to compensate him. What are your plans? Jiang Wang asked. Cheng Gongsheng had already thought it through. If I can't get a good job, the title is meaningless. I'll see if I can find a chance to enter Jixia Academy to learn something. The biggest difference between Yung Genzuan and I is still in cultivation. To Cheng Gongsheng, his goal was to become the head of the Chongxian clan. The head of the Zhengjia clan had always been able to inherit the title of marquis. In terms of titles, hereditary titles were better than empty titles, and hereditary titles were better than ordinary hereditary titles. The head of the Zhengjia clan was a hereditary title of marquis, and his fief was the Zhengjia clan's land. Thus, Cheng Gongsheng did not care about ordinary titles. Jixia Academy was the most famous cultivation place in Qi. It did not belong to any sect or faction, but to the Qi Emperor. In the vast state of Qi, there were many grandmaster-level figures on duty and teaching. It was known as the Dragon Gate of Qi. If one could enter this academy to cultivate, it would be like a fish leaping through the Dragon Gate, and they would be reborn. However, it was not open to the public, regardless of whether one was a noble or a prince. Those who did not contribute to the country could not enter this academy. Jiang Wang asked curiously, everyone says that Jixia Academy is the Dragon Gate of Qi. What are the secrets behind it? First of all Qi Emperor's outer building cultivators and above must be on duty in the Jixia Academy's lecture building for 10 days every year. Any cultivator who enters Jixia Academy can ask someone in the lecture building to help them if they have any questions. Everyone has to do their best to answer their questions. If there is any insincerity, falsehood, or misfortune, the person who asked can report to the academy at any time. Once it is verified, there will be severe punishment. Just this alone is worth it. Jiang Wang praised. He knew the pain of not having a good teacher. As for the second, speaking of Jixia Academy, Cheng Gongsheng was proud of being a Qi citizen. Needless to say, the essence Qi in the academy is rich, and the country's destiny is rising. If one cultivates here, even if one does nothing, they can achieve twice the results with half the effort. The country's destiny was rising, especially in a powerful country like Qi. How would it feel to cultivate here? Jiang Wang could not help but feel a little fascinated. The third, Cheng Gongsheng suddenly smiled. Let's not talk about it, in case you are tempted. Chapter 341. Rome Country, Yingguang City. The general stationed in the city, Jingyi, was in an awkward situation recently. When he bravely exposed the Yang country plague, the Yang country was still a firm ally of Qi. His actions were not without the intention of secretly attacking the power of the state of Qi. However, he did not expect Qi to use this as a reason to send troops out of the Yang country and turn the vassal country into Qi territory. Hence, Jingye's actions became what some people called not looking at the big picture and not caring about the big picture. The reason was that after the Yang country turned into the Qi country, the Rong country was connected to Qi and became a side of the bed. The Yang country today seemed to be the Rong country tomorrow. The overlord of the central region, Jing country, and even the Mu country of the north supported the small countries in the east, just like how the Qi country supported the small countries in the north and central regions. However, when Qi really pressured them and sent generals like Cheng Xian and Chu Liang to lead the troops, would either Mu or Jing have the confidence to fight a country war with Qi in the east? The reason why Yang Jiande used all his strength to fight a final battle was because he knew that he could only win more support with a victory. If they were in the same situation, could the Rong country really do what Yang Jiande did? The answer was chilling. Not mentioning how the Rong imperial court secretly strengthened the border cities and commanderies. The border between the Yang country and Rong country was calm after the Qiyang War ended. The people at the bottom only cared about their 3 meals a day and did not care much about the world situation. On the second floor of a certain inn in the city, an ordinary-looking young man leaned against the window and looked at the people on the street in a daze. Their lives are still so peaceful. They don't know that danger is approaching and don't know what the future will be like. Maybe ignorance is bliss. In the room, Lu Huai, who had his beard glued on, sat by the table. Hearing what was said, he coldly said, "They're all ignorant commoners, lowly commoners. When the Qi army attacks, they're all obedient and beg for mercy. They are worse than dogs." The man looking out the window was naturally Yang Xuanzi. Hearing Lu Huai's words, he closed the window. To the people, what difference does it make if the ruler is surnamed Yang or Jiang? If the monarch's surname is Jiang, perhaps their lives will be more stable. Lu Huai looked at him in shock and anger, but thinking that this was the last bloodline of the Yang family, he could only say, How can you say that?" Yang Xuanzi came back and sat down at the table. He poured himself a cup of tea. "What's wrong? The kingdom of Yang has already fallen. Why can't eunuch hear the truth?" "Young master, be quiet." Lu Huai said anxiously, "We cannot be careless right now. This old servant's death is nothing to be regretted, but you are the one with the greatest weight." "Look," Yang Xuanzi laughed somewhat self-deprecatingly. "You and I are like stray dogs. We don't even dare to show our true faces or say our real names. We've even covered up our old identities tightly. If you and I are already like this, how can we force those commoners to be loyal to the country?" Lu Huai was speechless. In this world, no one owes anyone anything. As for the 200,000 officers and soldiers who died under the butcher's knife, who should they blame? Are you cursing my father? His Majesty has already shed his last drop of blood for the country. How can you? Yang Xuanzi raised a hand to interrupt him. "You'll get what you asked for. That's all." All right. Lu Huai was somewhat disheartened, but after a while, he still took out a round golden stone and an ancient beast hide from his storage box. "I brought it out of the palace. Which one do you want to learn?" There were words written in blood on the beast hide. After countless years, the blood was still as red as ever. A single glance at the words was enough to make one tremble from the depths of one's soul. One could sense how terrifying and powerful they were. This was the blood demon art of annihilation. However, Yang Xuanzi only glanced at it once before turning his attention back to the round golden stone. He suddenly laughed. "When did I ever get to learn the art of the golden solar flame?" The Sun Clan's secret art was only passed down to the crown prince. Back then, Yang Xuanji had only become the undisputed heir to the Sun Court after learning this art. Those who learned this art would inherit the Sun Clan's ancestral temple. However, the Sun Clan's ancestral temple had been spontaneously destroyed by the commoners of Zhaoheng City before the army arrived. How could they inherit it? Even the priests couldn't find it. The reason why people didn't believe in this spontaneously theory was because at that time, the savior of the people, Huang Yixing, was running around Hingyang County to persuade them to surrender. Destroying the Sun Clan's ancestral temple would prevent the Qi army from attacking. This was one of his achievements. However, the Sun Country was already destroyed. She wouldn't say anything about this and was only happy to see it happen. Lu Huai waited quietly for his decision. However, Yang Xuanzi only shook his head and didn't even look at the round golden stone. Father is 100 times more capable than I am. I can't do what he can't do. As the Sun Clan's bloodline, learning the art of the golden solar flame was equivalent to inheriting the responsibility. He knew that if he were in Yang Xuanzi's shoes, he would at most be more lenient to the commoners and might be able to win the hearts of the people. However, it was impossible to continue the dynasty under Qi's watch, not to mention that the dynasty was already destroyed. To rebuild the ancestral temple, it was easier to hope that the Sun Clan's ancestors would come back from the dead. What surprised him was that Lu Huai only said, "His Majesty said that he won't ask you to do anything. He only asked me to give this item to you." A coiling dragon jade pendant was placed on the table. He only needed to glance at it to recognize that it was Yang Jianda's personal accessory. How many times did he hide by his mother's side and secretly look up at that dignified but cold man? Usually, he only saw his side profile and this coiling dragon jade pendant. Did he notice the sadness and gaze at that time? Yang Xuanzi avoided all of this and only looked down at the teacup. However, from the surface of the water, he could see that his eyes had unknowingly turned red. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he was very calm. He reached out and grabbed the jade pendant and the round golden stone that represented the art of the golden solar flame. There's no need to talk about loyalty. Only the Sun Clan owes the people of the Sun Country, not the people of the Sun Country. "You're free," he said to Lu Huai. To this day, he was the only person who was still loyal to Yang Jianda. Yang Xuanzi had never liked this eunuch, but the country was gone, so there was no need to bind him with state affairs. With that, Yang Xuanzi got up and walked out. Lu Huai only asked, "What do you plan to do, young master?" Although it's impossible to restore the ancestral temple. Yang Xuanzi paused and walked out again. "As a son, I have to do something for my father who died in battle." Yang Xuanzi left. He closed the door of the guest room and also closed Lu Huai's last hope. Even though he himself knew how slim that so-called hope was, Yang Xuanzi had suggested that they hide in the border city of their own country outside the Sun Country. His absurd life in World Tower had taught him a lot about hiding his tracks. Lu Huai himself had no direction at all. Yang Jianda's dying order was for him to find Yang Xuanzi and take him away from the Sun Country, but it didn't say what to do next. If he had to have a goal, it would be to restore the Yang clan's ancestral temple to its former glory. He wanted Yang Jianda to find peace in the underworld and have an endless supply of incense. But in fact, he also knew that what Yang Jianda couldn't do when he was alive, it was even more impossible after his death. Even Yang Xuanzi himself, the only person qualified to continue the ancestral temple of the Sun family, was indifferent to this grand plan. What else could he do as an old eunuch who had lost his ruler and his country? "You're free." Yang Xuanzi declared his freedom as the only remaining bloodline of Yang Jianda. But what was freedom? Wasn't the days when he followed suit and waited carefully freedom? He couldn't remember how many years he had been in the palace. The only thing he remembered was that the king was only a prince back then. When he entered the palace for an audience, his posture was different from the others. He walked with a majestic gait, as if he was the master of this place. Later, as expected, he almost indisputably sat on the dragon throne. The prince, who vaguely had Qi's support, couldn't even cause a ripple in front of him. He also remembered that the king saw him in the palace back then and said that he looked familiar, so he casually appointed him as an attendant. Of course, he remembered that the king told him in the first court meeting after he succeeded the throne that the country was rotten. But even if it was rotten fruit, he would make it take root and grow into a towering tree. He remembered that when the crown prince was born, it was the first time he saw the king cry. The king cried and said, "When I'm 100 years old, I will not let my son be like this." But he remembered how the king was in high spirits and how depressed he was day by day. He witnessed all of it, felt all of it, and also thought about all of it. Now, the king was gone, the crown prince was dead, and the little prince was gone. In the empty guest room, only the animal skin scroll on the table was still flowing with blood. Lu Huai pursed his lips and couldn't even let out a sigh in the end. What frightened him was that he found that his eyes couldn't help but look at the animal skin scroll, and that animal skin scroll had been quietly unrolled at some point. The emotionless blood demon art. What frightened Lu Huai wasn't how inhumane this demonic art was, how terrifying it was, and how everyone hated it. It was that he found that he couldn't resist the desire to learn this demonic art. He had no family or friends, so he wasn't afraid of the emotionless blood demon art. But if there was anything holding him back, that was because of Yang Jianda's last words. He wanted to protect Yang Xuanzi. He had seen how Yang Jianda killed the members of the imperial family and slaughtered his own children. Even a genius like Yang Jianda couldn't help but end up like this. If he cultivated this demonic art, he would probably have to kill Yang Xuanzi one day to cut off the only thing holding him back. This thought only flashed through his mind for a moment, but it made him uneasy. That was the king's only remaining bloodline. How could he? Lu Huai's hands formed claws and instilled his Tao essence, immediately tearing the animal skin scroll into many pieces. But he still couldn't be at ease. He took out a ball of hot flames and burned the animal skin scroll that recorded the demonic art to ashes. But he was shocked to find that the blood words on the animal skin scroll flowed through his mind so clearly. He remembered every word of the emotionless blood demon art clearly. Chapter 342. Thousands of images flashed through Lu Huai's mind. One moment, Yang Jianda went on a killing spree in the palace, killing his own children. Another moment, Lu Huai achieved great success in his demonic arts. He killed his way into Linzi, massacred the Qi palace, and killed old Jiang in court. After a while, he was once again standing in front of Yang Xuanzi's corpse. Yang Jianda's face was covered in blood as he looked at him. "Dog slave, I told you to protect my only remaining son. Why did you kill him?" Lu Huai broke free from his deranged imagination and panted violently. His face and body were already covered in dense beads of sweat. However, the blood-red words kept flowing in his mind, becoming clearer and clearer. No, I can't." He crazily shouted a few words, then suddenly turned his hand around and hit his own head until it exploded. Red and white blood flowed all over the ground. Lu Huai's corpse was lying on the ground, but the skin and flesh on his body had all relaxed and was no longer as tense as before when he was in a state of fear. However, the window was closed, but a gust of wind came from somewhere. The wind picked up the ashes of the animal skin book on the table and gently scattered them on Lu Huai's body. The ashes gradually disappeared, and so did Lu Huai's body. In the end, there was not a single red or white stain on the ground, nor was there any flesh or bones. There were only the clothes Lu Huai wore when he was alive, and the clothes. An ancient animal skin book. The waves caused by the blood demon technique in Rome had no effect on the Yang region. The people here welcomed the rule of the state of Qi in fear and unease, but they quickly adapted to it. There are many reasons for this. For example, the last backbone of the Yang court, Huang Yixing, or the benevolent and righteous man from Qingyang town. Both of them had contributed to stopping Xiong Tu's butcher's knife. Huang Yixing had ensured peace in Hingyang County, while Jiang Wang had established a utopia in Jiaqing City of Rizhao County. Countless people lived on both sides. Of course, Jiang Wang's reputation could catch up with the former, mainly because Cheng Gengsheng spared no effort to promote him. Now, of the 3 counties in the Yang region, only the position of Rizhao County's town commissioner was undecided. This showed how much resistance there was, but Jiang Wang was already very popular among the people. Jiang also had some hopes for this. It was only after he was granted the title of Baron of Qingyang Town that he truly enjoyed the benefits of Qingyang Town. The title of an official was never a simple honor. It was related to the imperial court's rule over the country. Relatively speaking, it could also enjoy the benefits of the country's fate. Specifically, it affected the authority of the official and also determined the feedback that the official could receive. For example, Ximyunan was able to use the seal of Jia City's city lord to issue edicts because he relied on the people of Jia City. Gathering the people's hearts of the people's hearts could not only for conquest, it could also help cultivation. Jiang himself. In fact, he had already completed the control of Qingyang Town. However, due to the lack of propriety, he could not be justified. It was only when his soul was trapped in the flying snow tribulation that he unexpectedly received feedback. But it was not an orthodox method. The car-patterned red flag could have helped him gather the people's hearts and be used by him. Unfortunately, before it could be completely integrated with Qingyang Town, it was destroyed in the hands of the Dragon Bone Mask. But now, the Yang region was under the control of Qi. Jiang became the rightful lord of Qingyang Town after the Qi court issued an edict. He could truly understand the saying, "The people's hearts and minds are always up and down." It was reflected in his cultivation. The people's hearts of Qingyang Town converged into his marquee seal. It was a small seal that was 2 fingers wide and 2 knuckles long. It was engraved with the words, Qingyang Man Seal. Wearing this seal by his side, he could feel the power of his soul being nourished and strengthened. Of course, this process was very slow, but if it could be done over the years, it would be a considerable improvement. If he could get the position of Rizhao County's town commissioner and manage this place well, it would mean more people's hearts and minds and a faster strengthening of his soul. The reason why many officials did not meddle in politics was not because they could not see the benefits. It was because this feedback was slow and long-term. On the other hand, corruption and excessive taxation often had immediate results. Generally speaking, the more prosperous the country was, the more officials were diligent to the people. It was a long-term strategy. The more unstable the country was, the more short-sighted officials were. They could not be sure that they could gain long-term benefits, so they just wanted to take the windfall and run. As the saying went, in a strong country, the scholars set the mountains and rivers. In a broken country, the civil officials were worse than chickens. It meant that the power that the 2 sides could mobilize was not on the same level. It also meant that the feedback that the 2 sides received was very different. Back to Qi's rule over the Yang region. From Jiang point of view, the reason why the people of the Yang land could accept the rule of the state of Qi so quickly was because of the state of Qi's years of infiltration, the influence of the people's customs, and the results of the former Prime Minister Yan Ping's policy. However, the most direct reason was that the Qi army had wiped out all the beasts in the Yang region as soon as they completed their de facto occupation of the entire Yang region. This solved the problem of the beasts that countless people of the Yang region hated. Most of the people of the Yang region had never left the Yang region in their lives. For the first time, they realized that the beasts could be wiped out completely, that the wilderness was not that dangerous, and that hiking was not limited to a few miles in the suburbs. They experienced the stable life of the Qi people. Perhaps the Qi people themselves did not feel that this was a problem. However, from the Zhuang country to the Yang country, Jiang had personally experienced the tragedy of the 3 mountains city and witnessed countless tragic scenes. He could understand it the most. If a country was willing to wipe out the beasts, would a governor like Dou Yuanmei, who cared about the people, still be loyal to the Zhuang country? Although the beasts were common, there were too many secrets behind it. Jiang still could not figure out the reason behind it. When he asked Cheng Gongsheng, he did not explain in detail. It was difficult to say that he understood. In a quiet room in Qingyang Town, Jiang slowly stopped cultivating and controlled the soaring dragon to fly back to the isolated island of heaven and earth, ending the day's exploration of the Torso Sea. Although the fog of obscurity was scary, he had recorded the areas he had explored in his mind and formed a map that only he knew. As he explored more and more areas, he would be able to see the entire torso see one day. When he knew the direction in his heart, the fog of obscurity was much less scary. Master, Dugu Zhao's voice sounded outside the door. She was a sensible person and would not disturb Jiang Wang when he was cultivating. What's the matter? Jiang Wang asked. There's an old monk waiting for you in the courtyard. A monk? Jiang Wang was confused. Other than fighting with people from all walks of life in the great illusionary land, he did not remember dealing with people from Buddhism in the modern world. And it was an old monk. However, Dugu Zhao also seemed to be confused. He said he was fated to meet you. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.